Do we
never
want to
a
spend $4
reason,
million
which is
to do that? Which means a couple other projects.
Good evening.
That's the reality.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful sunny evening, and I want to thank KUAC for broadcasting us this evening. That's really thoughtful of them. It's a community service that I want to thank them for. So with that, we're going to call this meeting to order. This is the reconvened regular assembly meeting on April 16th, 2018. It's approximately 6 o'clock in the Mona Lisa Drexler Assembly Chambers. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Ms. Dodge. I'd like to note for the record that Mr. Quist is excused this evening. Mr. Lojeski?
Here.
Mr. Tacky?
Here.
Mr. Cooper?
Here.
Ms. Major?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Lawrence?
Here.
Ms. Dodge?
Here.
You have a quorum?
Thank you very much. And excuse me, before we proceed, I want to remind you about our emergency exits in case we need them. There's the double doors we came in through. There's a little single door over behind both of these columns, and if you go out and then head either out this door to the right and this door to the left, you'll find your way out to the parking lot, and we'll figure out what's going on. I presume we won't need to do that, but should we need to, we'll be ready. So, we are meeting here this evening to pick up ordinance number 2017-20-1X, which is an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2017-18 budget by reallocating $292,807 and by appropriating $2,465,000 from the Facilities Maintenance Reserve to the Capital Projects Fund for various borough-wide facilities projects. The sponsor is Mayor Castle. We heard public hearing last Thursday, so public hearing is presently closed on this ordinance, and we have a proposed substitute by Assemblymember Roberts in our yellow folders. There's additional information in the yellow folders, and we are at a place where I would look for a motion to adopt.
Move to adopt. Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Tacky.
Move the substitute.
Mr.
Second.
Roberts has moved the substitute, and that's been seconded by Mr. Lajeski. So let's all take a minute to find the substitute, which is, for those in the audience, it is the buff-colored package that we have, or ordinance. And Mr. Roberts, would you like to speak to your substitute?
Okay, a lot to say. Let's see if I can remember what I was going to say from last week. So I agree with probably the main point that the mayor has brought out, and that what we're doing at the moment is unsustainable. It wasn't a good path for us to follow in the first place. This came about because we got two reasons. Number one, the voters kept voting for powers, and the borough kept expanding the services of those powers. That ultimately requires infrastructure and buildings and facilities at some point. We got state and federal money, and we built those. So now what we've ended up with is we're paying the operational costs with the taxes to keep those services going, but we're not keeping up with the building maintenance costs. When I was young, I had a condo, and the condo fees, they put away money so they could replace that boiler in 20 years. You know, it's just part of the planning, and the borough hasn't been doing that for its buildings. And it's not just the borough that has this problem. You know, the state of Alaska built airports all over the state with federal money that requires them to maintain it. Now they can't afford to maintain it, and they're forced to anyway because of the contractual arrangement. And so that's where people really need to watch for grants and free money like that in the future, is the entanglements that come with them. So now we're at this place where we've got way too many buildings. And what are we going to do about it? And so the first thing brought up is Mary Saya. It's been brought up to demo it and close it down, and to try to get a bond pass for an aquatic center, and then build that, and then ultimately replace Hammy also. So I don't like that plan so much, and I've got a few reasons. First of all, of course, the bond may not pass, as many people have pointed out, and many bonds have failed in Fairbanks. And this bond doesn't have any reimbursement from the state like a lot of school bonds used to have. So it goes directly on the taxpayer's bill. It goes around the tax cap, and nobody's excited about that. So that's one thing. And it won't just necessarily be the aquatic center on that bond. It could be a lot of other things. We'll be talking about that later tonight. So then, I don't like the idea of replacing the buildings. What you do, you can replace the building, and you get out of all those maintenance needs that you allowed to build up, and you get to start fresh. But I think that's a really poor way to do things. Now, this isn't this administration's fault for getting us here, but I don't think taking down buildings that really don't have that long a lifespan in the overall scheme of things is the right way to go about. We had another really good letter today from another architect who looked over the Betty's Worth report and was talking about a lot of the details in it, and made some really good points on the viability of that building, and the much lower cost it would take to keep that going, as far as the maintenance money that we'd have to put into it for the heavy duty maintenance. And of course, the engineer's report itself that was being worked from pointed out the cost is much less to repair the obvious stuff. And what this letter pointed out is that usually the stuff is readily apparent. Every now and then you'll find something hidden, but usually the building shows itself and you see the problems. And so if those weren't pointed out in the report with that cursory examination from the experts, then the odds are smaller that you're going to have something. I mean, you might find some little thing, but they did thoroughly redo that building in the 80s, and I think it's probably pretty viable. And I don't want us to get in the habit of just replacing buildings when they get old, instead of doing the upkeep and doing the repair. I'm not saying we won't have to do that with some buildings. We're going to have to make some decisions. Some buildings are going to have to go. Some services are going to have to go. That's just the way it is, because it's unsustainable. Even if our economy was better, even if we didn't have the problems in the state, it's not sustainable. You just can't keep doing that. You can't keep not maintaining your buildings and building more all the time and then hoping that you can just, it's like a Ponzi scheme. It just keeps going until it doesn't. So in the end, I brought forward this substitute because I thought the first priority should be to fix the Mary Sign, not to demo it. I'm not against any of the other projects necessarily. We have plenty of money to do those with. I say those. I'm not saying we have plenty of money to do all our maintenance. We definitely don't have that. But we've got right now, I think it was $5.5 million in the budget, some large amount like that. We get a new lapse at the end of the year, and at some point when they get the accounting done, we'll have more money going to that facilities maintenance reserve. So we will have money to do those projects if we want to. And the administration can make choices, as they do all the time, on which projects are the most important and what we should move ahead on. And we give them that ability. But I think that the Assembly should definitely say at this point that we want to keep the Mary Side open. Certainly, at least, if the voters decide that they want an aquatic center, if that gets on the ballot, which I'm not saying I support that, but if it gets on the ballot and the voters decide that, and we build that, then maybe then it's the time that, okay, we've got a replacement that covers all the testimony, that covers all the needs, and we don't need it anymore. Now it's extraneous. Now we can get rid of it. But that's at least 2 years, and probably more as these big projects go. So, so I guess I'd ask for your support in keeping Mary Side open. It is going to be hit to the budget this year, and we are going to need to dig deeper and do some more budget cutting. But everyone in this assembly knows I'm willing to help with that. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. So on the proposed substitute, any discussion or debate? Yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Well, what the substitute proposes is that, instead of addressing the roof at the Pioneer Park, at Pioneer Park, Pioneer Hall, and, even more importantly from my perspective, maintaining Westcott swimming pool so it can remain open. Those are, and determining whether the Big Dipper arena is viable or, it can hold up to an earthquake. The substitute would have us take away all that expenditure and put it all into Mary Side. I can't abide by that. I think that is not prudent. And you don't save the older one pool and then let another pool go to waste. So I'll be voting against the substitute.
And Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. Just following on what Mr. Lawrence said, that, I appreciate that Mr. Roberts brought this out as a point of discussion, but I think taking funding away from these other projects would be in error at this point, especially as I understand that the roof at Pioneer Hall at Alaska Land is currently leaking. And, we've got valuable things there that we need to protect, like Makatant's paintings and things like that. So, and I'll also note that in our folders, there's a graph that talks about and has some questions for Assembly from the Assembly of different options about operating Mary Side. They're all within the $687,000 figure that's currently proposed for demolition. So I think that we ought to go back to the main resolution and work there on the issues that Mr. Roberts made. So I'm not going to support removing funding for all the other projects.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Actually, I'm going to hold my for the main motion.
Okey-doke. On the substitute, Mr. Turkey.
I'm going to echo the same comments that Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Cooper had already pointed out, but also add to it as well. That Mr. Roberts had said that he's not into replacing buildings, but this isn't just a replacement of a building with an aquatic center, it's replacing multiple buildings. So it's like consolidating the cost of operating our budget, operating our borough. So I'm going to vote against this substitute because I think we need to address other maintenance concerns too.
And Mr. Roberts?
Yes, I should point out, remind everyone that everything can be amended back in to the project. On this substitute, all the different projects. This just gives the ability to amend back in. And of course, maybe the Assembly wants to amend the Mary Side line on the original motion, and that's fine too. And so I'm letting the public know that may happen and to sit tight and see what happens. But I just want to remind you of that ability. I also wanted to just point something out while we're on the topic to the administration. If we end up deciding to do maintenance instead of demolition, I hope that we'll really work on the time. In this memo we got, it's not closing until December to start the maintenance work, and maybe we could get some maintenance work done this summer while we've got the summer season. Other thing that was mentioned was maybe that they were looking at getting rid of the weight room, putting in a mechanical room. And I was thinking, how about we get rid of one of the funky conference rooms and put in a mechanical room? I know I was in a room once, it was just the weirdest conference room all along at that. I don't know what's possible, but I think maybe we could leave the weight room and leave usable facilities like that. There's plenty of conference space out there, and so maybe we could look at that. So that's it.
Thank you. And Ms. Major.
So I just wanted to be clear for the sponsor of this, or I just wanted to make sure I was clear. So a question for Mr. Roberts. So your intent was for all of the projects that were recommended for appropriation or reallocation, that all of that money then would go towards Mary Side instead of those? Yes,
and so then that any projects that the Assembly would also want based on the substitute, they'd amend back in.
So based on that discussion, I do agree with my fellow Assembly members that there are also some really critical repairs needed elsewhere, and so I'm not, I'll be voting against this amendment for that reason, that I don't want to see us not do demolition in other areas. But it sounds like we've got a way forward on the original ordinance.
Anyone? Yes, Mr. Wojcicki.
So I'm trying to remember I remember the general justification for demolishing the old Adler School, but what I'm wondering is what would be the cost of leaving it up? Are we worried that someone might get into it and get hurt, or liability, or is it just an eyesore, or what's the problem of leaving it up for a year?
Mr. Sloan will answer that.
Thanks. Yeah, good question. It is a liability at this point. We have had break-ins, we have had people living in it, and so it's a liability to the borough.
Thank you.
Anything else? Just for the members of the public that are here and on the radio, as a presiding officer, the reason you don't hear me express opinions is because my job is to be neutral, to ensure that the discussion is not influenced by my opinion or position. So that's why you don't hear me say, yes or no or anything else. So with that, I think it looks like we're ready to vote. Clerk, please call the roll on the substitute. It will not carry the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
No.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Ms. Major?
No.
Mr. Lajewski?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
No.
Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none?
1-7.
It fails 1-7, and we're back to the main ordinance in front of us. Mr. Gray.
So I was wondering if the administration could remind all of us, we had that discussion about repair and maintenance of Mary Saya and Hammy, I believe it was, combined in the next 10 years would outpace easily the potential cost of the bond issue for an aquatic center. Is that correct? It was, well, if I remember right, it was well into 40-something million plus dollars.
Okay, I'm trying to remember which numbers go to which because we've analyzed about 8 different scenarios here. Every one of them costs more than the proposal that I'm bringing forward, either by a small amount or a large amount, over looking at it for the next 10 years, trying to do the maintenance that's required in the short term, and as it goes on over the years, and adding in the operating costs, which you have to do, and et cetera. The cost for every scenario that we analyzed is more. And we had to combine that with the fact also that that would continue on in the future if we were nursing older buildings, because the maintenance costs continue to be high beyond 10 years. So then you're into a replacement mode at that point in time, or continuing with trying to keep an older facility going. That answer your question?
Yeah, and so with the, not saying I'm going this route, but would the bond be like a standard 30-year bond that we're discussing?
We hadn't decided, probably 20 years.
Okay.
And I think that, I know it's difficult, but not disrespectful at all, but I'm not factoring in whether or not the bond passes or fails. It's irrelevant to the discussion of trying to keep 3 swimming pools going. That's what I'm trying to do. So if the bond passes, then we have a new aquatic center. If the bond doesn't pass, then we don't have a new aquatic center, but we still don't have Mary Sy either way, because the expense of keeping all 3 pools going, as well as the other facilities, and we can talk more about that if you want, but it exceeds the money that we have available. So one of the pools needs to go away regardless of what happens with a bond. One pool needs to go away, and possibly 2, depending on which pool goes away. If it's one of the cheaper pools, so to speak, we probably can't keep the other 2 going. Then 2 pools go away, the 2 cheap pools. That would be Hammy and Westcott. Can't say definitively on that, but one of them really needs to go away at this point in order for us to even come close to being able to move forward with our building maintenance. And that's very, very painful for me to be in this position as a Parks and Rec director who loves Parks and Rec facilities. But again, it's just the finances don't balance.
Thanks.
I have a motion for it.
Mr. Lajewski.
Okay. I've got a motion to delete line 66 and 67, which is the demo of the Mary Sy Rec Center, and reduce any other relevant numbers associated with that 286,807.
So to make sure I understand your proposal, Mr. Lajewski has proposed deleting line 66 and 67, which would essentially eliminate the lines that say Mary Sy Recreation Center demolition, would also reduce the amount by 682,807 at... Oh, thank you.
I may be looking at the wrong document.
The
I may have
wrong
my
one.
lines
Apparently,
wrong.
I had the substitute also. Do we have the regular one?
60 and 61.
Go.
It's
So
line
are you
60.
looking at 60 and 61, Mr. Lajewski? Page 10 of our
I think you understand
folder?
my intent. I'm getting
Okay,
the right
thank you.
page. I was on the wrong document here.
Thank you, me too. So we were on the same page, literally. So Mr. Lajewski has moved to delete line 60, which is the Mary Sy Recreation Center demolition, along with the allocation/reallocation, and I'm sure also that would mean reducing other amounts in the ordinance as appropriate. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, so Mr. Lajewski has moved and Mr. Gray has seconded, deleting line 60. Mary Sy Recreation Center demolition, 682,807. On the proposed, yes, Ms. Dolan.
If I can, just to make sure the motion is complete, this demolition is also referenced on line 75, so you don't have to do it as part of this motion, but you'll have to take care of that if this passes.
Thank you. Unless someone would like to amend this amendment to include, pardon me?
All related
I
areas?
said related areas.
Oh,
Are
sorry,
we
I
good?
missed that part.
Okay, super.
We're okay with that,
We're,
Madam Chair?
yes,
Thank you.
because clearly it shows up in a few different places. So, yes,
I would
Ms.
like to
Major on the amendment.
Was it seconded?
Yes, it was seconded by Mr. Gray.
I'd like to amend the amendment.
Okey-doke.
And rather than striking out line 60, simply changing it from keeping line 60 instead of saying demolition, striking out demolition and replacing it with repair and maintenance.
Is there okay, so what we have in front of us now is line 60 will read Mary Sy Recreation Center repair and maintenance, $682,807. Been moved by Ms. Major, seconded by Mr. Roberts. Discussion on the proposed amendment to the amendment. Mr. Lajewski.
I support it. That was kind of my intent that the money would be used for that anyway. I was just thinking of another process, but this does the trick.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, did you have your hand up?
Well, well, wait, so we're talking about the amendment to the amendment?
That is correct.
Oh, no, I have no problem with that.
Okay. Any other discussion on the proposed? Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So if your intention is then to keep Mary Sy open you're going to need to add another $522,220 to the operating budget that I took out because we weren't going to be operating Mary Si. And you'll have to, in addition to this repair money that you're authorizing tonight, you'll have to add another $800,000 to the capital maintenance in the first year to keep the building open for 1 year. That will get us 1 year. Then if you want to keep the building open another year, you'll need to look for another $2 million.
So, excuse me.
Make those amendments in this ordinance with all
No,
of them.
he's just informing people of things. On the amended amendment, any other discussion on this? I think.
Did you say
Mr.
this
Tackett.
on the amended
amendment? The amendment as amended.
Or are we working on voting on the amendment to the amendment?
We're working on the amendment. You're right. The amendment to the amendment. Thank you. Any more? Dare I ask if there's objection to the amendment to the amendment? It'll carry the amendment, right? Proposed amendment. I see no objection to it. So
Hold on.
Yes, Mr. Cooper, would you like us
Did
to
you rule
vote?
that it carried? So
It carries. It would.
if it carried the amendment, then the amendment would no longer be before us.
Thank you. So I'm around there. So
Whatever you're clear, however you want to rule
Try
down.
and say this. I apologize. As you can tell, sometimes we get we have some interesting discussions that only us we understand, and sometimes we're confused.
Because if so, I'd like to discuss the
Yes,
amendment
okay.
as amended.
So right now we have an amendment to the amendment in front of us. I'm seeing no objection to the amendment, which would then bring us back to the amendment. Is everybody as amended?
So,
Do you have an objection, Mr. Lejeski, or do you want us to? Okay, thank you.
So-
So our amendment, let me explain then. So the amendment in front of us now is Mary Si Recreation Center, repair and maintenance, $682,807 is what we're considering, changing demolition to repair and maintenance. Okay? Okay, on that, I had Mr. Lejeski, you want to talk about it? Okay, Mr. Lejeski, on the amendment as amended.
Yeah, so my intent and my way of thinking about these borough facilities as a whole is, I guess, one, I'd say thank you to the mayor for beating this drum for some time. I don't know if I agreed with the specifics of how you did it with this particular one, plastering a sign in Mary Si during operation hours and basically stirring everybody up. But you did bring the conversation forward. It's a serious one, and you're doing what other mayors haven't done. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I believe the mayor when he basically says we can't afford the buildings. I hope everybody else agrees that too. We have to get more money or we have to downsize. And we have a tax cap. I'm glad we have a tax cap. It means we can't get a whole lot more money other than what we can get through bonds and user fees, basically. So when we have to go through this downsizing process, my line of thinking is if we have a building, particularly like the Mary Si Rec Center, and a lot of people use it, they really like it, they care about it, we should, instead of just rallying everybody up and saying, oh, we're going to demolish it, get rid of it, we're going to run it for X period of time. We can't afford to do it after that. If you want to come together, form a nonprofit, whatever the alternative is, I'm sure there's lots of things I can't even think of. You have a year to plan and come up with an alternative. So that's kind of what I want to do is run the Mary Si for a year and see what we can do after that time. And then, we have to face reality, as the mayor was saying, sooner or later.
Mr. Lawrence.
Well, I don't think this borough has the luxury of postponing facing reality. This community has far more maintenance needs than it has money to pay for, and buildings will have to be shut down and or demolished. And what this amended amendment is saying is that we're going to put $682,000 into Mary Si, which isn't enough. So we're going to be amending it further to put more money into it because there's no point in putting $682,000 into this building. It won't really accomplish anything. Last Thursday, Mr. Bettysworth was here, and I asked him, if you owned a building, would you put any more money into this building? And he said, absolutely not. And, I know there's a lot of sentimental attachment to this building, and I know it serves a population in this community that needs to be served, and and they deserve to be served. But we got to figure out another way of making it happen, because continuing to put money into Mary Si is not the way to accomplish it. We don't have, with the finite resources this community has, we have to be, frankly, we have to be more frugal. We have to be smarter than that. And it means some sacrifice, and I regret that. But, oil prices have plummeted, and people don't like to pay taxes. And people support the tax cap, so we can't get any more money. So this is where it comes down to. And so I'll be voting against this amendment because I know what's involved here is as the mayor said, is we to keep this building open, whether it's 6 months or a year more, is we're talking about probably $1.5 to $2 million, and then where are we at? That's the problem. This is an old building that isn't going to get any younger, and no matter how much money we put into it, we're still going to have to continue to put more and more into it, and that just that doesn't add up. Not given the financial situation of this borough.
I have Mr. Cooper next.
I guess I have a question for the administration. I get that to continue operating Mary Si for a year, we'd have to put $522,000 back into the operating budget. That's just the operational cost of feeding it and staffing it and everything else. I guess my question is more towards the repair and maintenance. There's 682. The proposal is to convert the 682,000 to repair and maintenance, and then add 800,000. From the chart you provided, it looks like that work would begin. You propose to begin that in December of 2018. Is that right?
True.
And so, presumably, even if we authorize went around repair and maintenance, that would still give us time to weigh options and make reach a different conclusion before December 2018. Although it wouldn't allow for demolition this year if that ultimately ended up being the best option.
Yes, there's a number of complexities here, and all these scenarios involve some level of additional funding. One thing that you need to be aware of also is that our analysis of the building and Bettesworth's analysis of the building said to do a deep dive structural and seismic. So it's our intention, if after tonight we're instructed to keep the building open for a year, we need to initiate that study, hire a consultant, get them in here ASAP, and take a look at the building and do a deep dive on it. We'll have to close the facility for 4 or 5 days, not a big deal. However, pending the results of that survey, we might have to close the building immediately. And done deal, over, said and done. We don't know. There are signs and suspicions, and every engineer that's looked at it says it is likely we have a problem. Now, how severe is it? Is it something that's a couple $100,000? Maybe. Mr. Bettesworth's testimony last week was that it's likely to be a couple million. Okay, that's on top of all these numbers we've given you, and I can't say one way or another on that because we don't know until we do that investigation. And so that's the first step in this equation. The timing of the rest of the work, what our plan would be if we were trying to keep the building open, is we have $1.46 million worth of work that's been identified that has to be done the first year to keep the building open as soon as possible. We would go out with an RFP for design on that, and the earliest we would be ready to start working any of that would be November, best case scenario, probably December. How long you want to delay any of that work, I would discourage delaying it too long because a lot of it is life safety stuff that, frankly, just like the seismic, we might be over the edge already on these things. And part of that work includes more of a deep dive on some of the other things that we know are problems. And we would need to address it sooner as opposed to later. And so we would like to start the work then December-ish. Could you push it off a little bit? I guess. I'm not sure what the advantages to delaying it are. We're just putting patrons potentially at more risk, maybe not, depending on the deep dive. So some of these things we don't have answers for, because when we analyzed it, we said we need to get a third party in here ASAP. We did that. We hired one of the most reputable firms in town to do that. And his suggestion is don't invest another penny in that facility, period. It's not worth even studying it because what we know already means you should tear it down. Why find out more reasons why you should do that in the tune of millions of dollars more? Yes, that's depressing, but that's the reality of it.
And thanks for bringing up the fact that if a life safety issue is discovered, that we'd have to shut it down. Because I think that's a fair point that folks have to understand if that's how it goes forward. And we do that analysis. That may be the end result on a shorter term basis than we would like. I guess the follow-up question I had was mostly answered, which was what specific work we would need to do to make it through a year or even the summer. I think fundamentally one of the issues I'm hearing from folks is that we have a sense of the cart before the horse a little bit, and it would be nice to be able to have some time to figure this out a little bit more and make sure that this is really the right step forward. I also hear you saying we've looked at it and this is the right step forward, so I'm trying to weigh the costs and benefits of those approaches. And Mayor has his hand up again to respond to that.
Okay.
I've heard the phrase cart before the horse, and on the surface it looks that way if the status of this building is pending on whether or not we have a bond. Then we should absolutely wait. My point is, regardless of the vote up or down on the bond, the building still needs to come down ASAP or get multi-millions of dollars of repair work into it for the next several years. So the vote on the bond is really irrelevant to the condition of the building right now. Is a huge point for us. So that isn't putting the cart in front of the horse. It's the reality of the building. This is not a knee-jerk reaction made in a short period of time. We started on this a year ago. We started looking at this facility and other facilities. In the fall, I rolled out the sandbox meetings to say we got a problem on our hands. I explained that. We did a deeper dive in response to questions from the first sandbox meeting, and we hired consultants to go through our buildings, the best in town, the best engineers, and we kind of said, here's the buildings we see need the most attention in the short term. They went through our buildings. We just got those reports in January, and when we got those reports, we had Sandbox 2 trying to get, we didn't have all the reports at that point, we had some of them. We had Sandbox 2 meeting to explain this to the public members that were picking up on it. I was pretty clear about it. We had multiple meetings, not only Sandbox meetings, but Mr. Williams and I both went to community service organizations. I mean, we did a lot with this. A lot of people didn't pick up on it, totally understand, but we were working on it and trying to gain some community feedback. We got the rest of the reports in, which confirmed what our in-house suspicions were and said there's more work that needs to be done and had recommendations. So this has been a year project with multiple outside engineering firms, the best in town, and our in-house staff who happen to be very competent because everything that we were suspicious of is either as bad or worse than we suspected. And that's what's brought us here today. Not a quick decision, not a pleasant decision, but one that has had a number of experts review our work and our facilities. Okay.
And this will be my last comment, and I was not limiting the cart before the horse comment to just the bond issue. I've heard it in the general context of what's our plan for dealing with this. It's not so. My cart before the horse cliche is broader than just the bond. To be clear, I've heard it in several contexts, and just to be certain, that's what I was saying.
Thank you. Ms. Major.
So I can certainly empathize with the mayor's position. I professionally have experience with facilities when you want to demo them because it's the right thing to do, and 30 years later, they're still standing because every time there's open space, somebody wants it. It's like a bad penny that won't go away. So I empathize with the situation, and I know sometimes when it's time for a building to come down, it's just time for a building to come down. But like many others, number one, is very clear that Mary Saya meets a need in our community that isn't met elsewhere. I think that's been made very clear to us. I am concerned about the groups that would essentially be displaced without it. And number two, I just don't like the timing. I don't like the timing of demolishing it when we don't have another option for folks. And I understand, right, when you've got assessments and you're looking at life, health, safety, and, when you have buildings occupied, and then when they're unoccupied, people go, well, maybe there's a structural issue and we need to do some more work on it. So the fact that it needs work, the fact that we don't know the full scope of the work doesn't scare me necessarily. It just makes me go, okay, where, at what point do we say, is it a couple of years? How much life do we have left in that facility before we know we have to make a decision? I agree that at some point in time, yes, we need to be out of this facility and into something that is going to have that longer life. And it's not an easy position. I understand. I get it, but I can't see taking away a facility right now when there's a need for it.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
So, I guess in answer to some of the comments here, that I think we should take the money that we're allocating here, and part of that should be used for the deeper dive to actually see if we have the issues. And I absolutely agree that we should do a little more research, and then we will know a little bit more. I do think that there's some work we can do this summer. This money for the water main was already that project was already out there, so we should be able to get that done this summer. And that had to do partly with the whole fire system, because we're worried about the capacity there and we're going to test it. We don't need to test it. Let's just replace that water main, and yeah, there'll be testing involved with that. But the point is, we can do some work this summer, so we don't waste the summer just sending it off to a design firm. We can get what we can get done. We can do something, we can be productive, and maybe there'll be less closure time then when the time finally comes that we have to do a big closure to do a bunch of work. And you just shouldn't waste the last minute summers. You got to use them. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Mr. Tacky.
So I guess my question is then, what is the cost of a deep dive analysis out of the 682,000 we have?
There's about 8 different analyses that were part of the Bettesworth plan. Our plan with the $1.46 million that I said we need in the first year includes the seismic study, because that's one that is absolutely a fire life safety issue. So we're looking at these things. You bring up great arguments. These things have all been considered and factored in here. The water system, we are planning on replacing the main service into the building because we know that there's problems there. And we know that we have some issues with the sprinkler system, but if you're familiar with the building, the sprinkler system isn't throughout the whole building. So now the city requires us, when we work on it, we have to sprinkler the rest of the building. We can't do a major project without finishing it, because it currently doesn't meet code. And so on any building, when you don't meet code, you're sort of grandfathered in until you do a renovation project that affects that code. And we would be doing that. And so what we're going to have to do then is not just replace the water line, but put sprinklers in the rest of the building, which we can do. But you need to understand these ripple effects, because now as we do that, we have to tear into the structure of the ceilings and such. And we're confident, and Mr. Bettesworth was confident, we have a hazmat issue. So when we do that, when we tear into those walls and such, we're very likely going to have to address the hazmat issue. That's the prediction. Now, we haven't put any money in it, the $1.46 million. I'm not trying to inflate that number here by telling you these things, but what I am telling you is the $1.46, as we tear into that building doing remodel work, we're very likely, the engineers and our consultants are predicting we will find these other things. Maybe we don't, but they're saying we will. And then we have to add that to the $1.46 million that's needed in this next year. How much is that going to be? Mr. Bettesworth said figure another $350,000 or so for the hazmat stuff. Add that to the 1.46. You can see how these things ripple when you get into renovation projects. And the folks who do this for a living, the professionals, and I used to do this, so I'm familiar with it. And we talked about it. As you do a remodel job, you likely run into more work than you initially found or thought you had until you tear the wall apart. That happens 99.99% of the time. How catastrophic is that? You never know until you tear into the wall.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Okay, well, some of my questions were answered, but I'm really worried that we are trying to patch in a short-term solution to a very long-term problem here, and I think it's been made clear that we have to break the cycle of deferred maintenance here in the borough. I'm not saying that I want to demolish Mary Saya, per se, but if we find a way to keep it open and operating, we're going to have to cut something. Something's got to be cut. And I hope everyone here understands that. Something has to be cut, either way. And we're not guaranteeing that Mary Saya could even operate past another year. It might be very well that we'd have to demolish it next year. So there are no guarantees here.
Mr. Wojcicki.
Before we demolish any buildings, I guess I really think the correct path is to put it for sale first, unless there's a reason that the borough wants that piece of land and is just trying to essentially create a $700,000 piece of vacant land to do something with. It should be sold first, outside of the whole keeping Mary Saya going or not, just for any property. And so for something like the old Adler School demo, I didn't ask those specific questions. Why didn't we do that? It really sounded like it's beyond the point where anyone would entertain realistically buying it. But I don't think the Mary Saya is at that point, and so there's no way tonight I'm going to be voting to send money over to demo it. That's for sure out of me. And then I want to give the mayor here a chance to clarify something, because I will admit I had a dark thought about some of your possible intentions, and probably some of the public did too. So I'm going to tell you the thought, and then I want you to tell me why I'm wrong. and convince me. So you mentioned that you were likely going to be directing folks to close the facility for a few days to do some initial deep dive analysis, right? Seismic study. Was there something else that you'd be doing in that initial 4 or 5 days of temporary closure?
Probably not.
Okay, so
I wasn't planning anything, but yeah, just the initial study on that.
Okay, so this is what it sounds like to someone who's really cynical. It sounds like you're trying to find another way to close the Mary Saya if you don't get your way tonight. So that's where I want you to tell me why I'm wrong.
I was a Parks and Rec professional for quite a few years. This is my passion, folks. I don't want to close any one of our facilities. Period. And it's ridiculous to say that I am trying to target this facility because I don't like it for some reason. That's insanity. I'm sorry, but it is. This pains me. I'm very emotional about this. I love our Parks and Rec facilities, and there are people that would just as soon us close all of them and get out of the business. There are folks that have sat at this dais and suggested exactly that. I sat next to one for a few years that said we shouldn't do any of these facilities, and I fought with him tooth and nail to avoid this. It's ludicrous to say that I don't support Parks and Recreation. This is a piece of a 10-year plan, because we can't deal with this one. This is not knee-jerk on one facility that we're trying to drum something up here on this building. We have a total comprehensive plan on all of our facilities to, over the next 10 years, play major catch-up on the maintenance and do so without exceeding the tax cap within our budget. In order to get there, we can't waste any money because it's a very, very thin line here. And just as we talked about a minute ago, if we flip this money from the other projects into Mary Sy, it would mean we would close Westcott Pool and Pioneer Hall. So I don't want to, I'm trying to minimize what we have to close, how long we have to close it, and look at the service to our community over the next 10 years and look at it the most comprehensive, cost-efficient way. And that's what I'm trying to do here. And it's part of that whole long plan. It's not a knee-jerk or a cart in front of the horse. The Public Works Director and I have spent days, probably too many, anyway, coming up with a way forward without exceeding the tax cap and dealing with all of the buildings. And this is one piece of that. And I feel it disingenuous to have that building standing there in October when we're voting on an aquatic center or not, with the hopes that it's going to stand longer, when some of the proposals are just keep it standing for 6 months. What would that cost? Keep it standing for 1 more year. How much would that cost? That's a little disingenuous and then tear it down in 1 year when people are voting no on the aquatic center because they're hopeful this building's going to be there in long term, when we know it's not going to be, unless we dedicate the millions of dollars required to keep it there. That's where I'm coming from here. We have to be upfront with what's going on, and so that the public's aware of the situation that we're in, and they know both today, tomorrow, and whenever exactly the position we're in, and that's what I'm trying to articulate.
Am I still recognized by the chair?
Yes.
Yeah, so I got a specific question that would answer that other question too. So why is the seismic study so critical within the next few months or so? Why couldn't that be deferred 6 months or 12 months or whatever?
Because we're aware and we've been advised the building likely has problems. If it falls down and 100 people die, we've got a ridiculous liability on our hands for not dealing with it. So the things that we've been advised are likely a problem. That's a polite way of saying you're not paying us to do the deep dive here, but we're identifying that you have an issue. Now we know we have an issue, and if we don't deal with it, we've got crazy liability. So that includes things like seismic and structural and hazmat. I mean, we've been notified, and so we'll do the analysis so that we don't waste any money, and we have a good plan on how to deal with these things. But if an engineer tells you that you got a structural seismic problem, the building's closed right now because you lose your certificate of occupancy. That's what happened at Ryan School. You know, it wasn't seismically stable, and we lost our certificate of occupancy. Had to come down. Big history piece in our community, and we lost it because of that, because we didn't have the money to fix that. We're probably in the same boat with Mary Sy, and once we do the deep dive and we find that out, we can't legally keep the building open.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Florence, you're next.
Just in response to a couple of comments earlier, as far as installing the new, water main, or the water line for the building, my opinion is we don't want to spend a penny on this building until we have that deep dive, if that's what we're going to do. That's just insane to spend any more money on this building if it is as close to being obsolete as it could be. And I got to tell you that unknown costs scare me a lot, because this community didn't have money to waste.
Mr. Gray.
So I guess also speaking to that point, Mr. Lawrence said, it's been floated the idea of having a private sale or a nonprofit maybe take over this facility. I think that might be wishful thinking. Either type of group would inherit the same problems that the facility has, and then what happens, a year down the road? I don't know of a nonprofit that could sustain those kind of costs. Then the nonprofit's out of business, or what if there's a structural failure? Same deal, nonprofit's out of business.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. A couple questions. One, on that point in the private sale plan, it's really a question for Ms. Dolan. If we sold the pool, it would have to be for a public purpose. Is that right?
If you sold it, no. I mean, you can set the terms of a sale under Title 20 for buildings and improvements. So no, I think you could just do it to the highest. Yeah. So I don't think you have to do that. I think if you give it away, you can't take borough assets and give them away unless there's a public purpose.
Okay. And I guess part of what I was getting at there is that, putting a pool in private hands to be run as a pool is not going to serve the people who use Mary Sy right now, because it's going to cost as much or more to run it as it is the athletic club. That's the reality of, that's why government sometimes subsidizes things like pools, is to make it accessible for the citizens of the community. Subsidize isn't necessarily the right word, but funds, operates them. So, and Mayor, before I ask you about repair and maintenance, I want to ask you about demolition. And last week we talked a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that part of the reason that this request for demolition is in front of us now is so that you can start the process, and not necessarily, you have paperwork that you have to go through to start any kind of RFP for any project.
We have a lot of paperwork, and we have to come back to the Assembly a couple times to get this all the way through to fruition. If we don't start it with a vote tonight, it won't happen this summer, and then we'll have to add the cost of keeping the building in some kind of standing state until the following summer. There'll be a cost associated with it, not huge if we're not operating it, but still a cost. And so really that's the decision for tonight, is to, should we start the process? You could still stop the process through the budget cycle when you vote on May 10th, because part of this, as we're identifying, depending on what course of action you want to take with the building, there's going to have to be some budget adjustments to what I've proposed, one way or another. So anyway, we could we could stop the process later if you chose to do so.
Thanks. That addresses two of the points I wanted to confirm, which is, one, this isn't an authorization to actually demolish Mary Sy. You'd have to come back at least a couple more times to make that happen. And I guess the second question I was going to ask is, when would you anticipate starting demolition of Mary Sy if funds were appropriated to do that?
Our target is just before the snow flies, is I think as fast as we could accomplish it if we started the wheels in motion tonight. You wouldn't see a contractor on the ground doing anything until at least the end of September.
And in relation to when you'd start demolition, when would you close Mary Sy?
Well, my budget has no money after July 1 because of a number of our concerns. I think we need to be out of the building. If we're not going to be operating it, you could add money to operate it for a few months, but some of the questions that we have do involve life safety, and I don't know how far we want to push that.
Right. And life safety aside, that was the next question I had you anticipated, which is, could we fund in the operating budget funds to make it through when demolition started? And I guess I just ask these questions and to point out to folks that even if the Assembly tonight decides that they want to appropriate funds for demolition, that's not the end of the process, that there's still more process to go, and there is still time to find alternative ways to deal with this. So I just kind of wanted to get both sides of the issue out there.
Mr. Roberts, you're next.
I guess the only point I wanted to bring up, and I don't have a lot of detail, but it was mentioned with Ryan and seismic and us having to shut down, but my memory serves, and Mr. Sloan can probably fill it in better, that we had time in there. We had some time. I mean, there was a process we worked through with the city, and they gave exemptions, and they let us do some things. But, of course, talking about the whole school and the gym that had maybe the majority of the seismic, I don't know all the details, but I don't know if we'd have to close it the next day, and it probably depends on the depth of the problem. I have a hard time imagining a building, the Ryan gym was a pretty tall building and had some serious building issues, the way they built it, as I remember from the description. But Mary Sy was rebuilt in the 80s by the borough with the standards they had at the time, which I don't think were as bad. And so I couldn't see it necessarily having to be shut down within a day because of seismic issues. I mean, you have to find some pretty big issue. And yes, we may find something, but I don't know if the odds are as great as might be being portrayed. I think that we have pretty good odds that we're able to keep this running for a while, and maybe once we do a little bit of deep diving, we'll get a much clearer idea, and we can make much clearer plans. Information always helps with that process, and in the meantime, we can serve that sector of the public that really uses that facility.
Thank you. I have Mr. Techie next, and then Mr. Lawrence.
So my question was then, if we don't pass it as repair and maintenance, but left it as a demolition, if a group did come forward that wanted to buy it, it could be stopped before it's actually demolished, right?
We can do that. So I offered it for sale at the last meeting, and I was dead serious. We'd be glad to sell it for $1 to whoever would guarantee to operate it in the fashion it's being operated now, as a pool and a rec center, so we wouldn't lose the service. Nobody's knocked on my door or interested, and if we did find somebody, I can guarantee the rates are going to skyrocket in order to make that a viable operation for anybody. That's why we got it in the first place, because YMCA couldn't keep it going. We did a back-of-the-napkin analysis today as we were working on these other reports, and currently the taxpayers in the community contribute $15.71 per visit use of the facility. If we do the minimum maintenance, not the deep dive work and the millions there, but the millions that we know we have to do just in the first year here, the taxpayers' subsidy to the facility, or however you want to phrase it, the net cost would be $77 a visit. And that would, that doesn't pass the red face test in my book. I know it's a huge number, and we can hear the murmuring, but when you talk about a few $1 million and the number of visits that facility has, it's easy to do the math. Take the millions, $2 million a year, 46,000 visits. and add that on top of what we already have. And then next year it's going to need $2 million more, and that doesn't address the big issues that we had in front of us that we don't know about yet. So again, that's another year at a subsidy rate of $77 a visit. Where does that stop, and how do you pass the red face test as a fiscally responsible person to say our community needs to contribute that much money to the operation of this facility? It doesn't compare to any other facility. It's an order of magnitude more than any other facility in the system. That's why it's on the table as the first facility to address on the list.
Yeah, that's my point. But.
Mr. Lawrence?
Mayor, a couple of questions. This seismic analysis, have you gotten any kind of quotes, or do you have any estimate on how much that would cost?
Any estimate, Mr. Sloan?
No, we don't right now.
Are we talking tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds?
The estimate that I could reference would be the one that's in this ordinance. So we did do an analysis on what a structural and seismic analysis of the Big Dipper would cost, and that was about $125,000. It's obviously a little bigger facility, so probably a little bit less for Mary Si, I would assume.
All right. The other question is, and I wish I had a chance, but I would, maybe it's not a question, but Mayor, has anybody talked to you about the possibility of subsidizing the use of the Alaska Club?
It would be, first off, it would be far cheaper for us to buy memberships for all the people that use Mary Si and have them we could buy memberships at Alaska Club and at Planet Fitness for far less money. However, it's not legal, and the attorney's sitting next to me, so I can't advocate for it. But I did discuss it with her, and we would have to offer that, excuse me, to everybody in the borough, not just the folks that are currently using Mary Si.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Tacky?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually address my points concerning the amendment. I think it's fiscally irresponsible to dump in, $2 to $4 million into a building that has a short-term life left to it. Continuing to do that is it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to vote against this amendment and leave it as a demolition because there are so many further steps ahead, as Mr. Cooper had pointed out with his questions to the mayor, and the fact that if somebody did want to organize a nonprofit organization to try and come and buy this for $4, it is an option. So that's my stance.
Okay, any last discussion, or yes, Mr. Wojcicki?
Yeah, in the case of this building, let's suppose we decide we're not going to offer this pool, okay? So we're going to get rid of it. How do we get rid of it? I absolutely will not vote to authorize money to demolish the building until it's been listed on the MLS for 6 to 12 months, or it's been up for auction, or someone's had a fair chance to buy it for a non-public purpose, just to, that'd get us some money. If someone pays more than $1, right? They pay $10, they pay $100,000, whatever. So I will be voting, I actually forget exactly where we are procedurally.
We're voting to amend demolition to read repair and maintenance.
So I will be voting for that to get rid of demo, and if that does not get amended, I will be voting against the whole ordinance because there's money that eventually can become demo money there. And for all the other assembly members, I want you guys to think about this like you're in a dark room all by yourself. The mayor said that the Mary Si would get likely demolished in the end of December before the snow flies. 2 things happen at that time of year. Typically the snow flies, and then we have an election right afterwards.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, authorizing this money would not, as I mentioned, bring the building down until the end of September or later, and that gives us a lot of time to offer it for sale, and we certainly can do that. And if a buyer came up in between, we can do that, and we wouldn't have wasted any money, and we could sell it. And acceptance of a sale would be up to you guys if $1 is a viable sale or whatever, and I'm certainly amenable to that. I think any sale, kind of fire sale of the facility means it's gone as far as a recreational facility is concerned, but we would make $1. The disadvantage to it is that it's right next to our tennis courts, and the tennis association has asked repeatedly and for a number of years to look for a larger piece of property where they could expand. If Mary Si wasn't there, the tennis courts could expand without building a whole new facility for them. And so they might not want us to sell it to someone for $1 because they have an interest in it. So all that would be your decisions at some point in time in the future. But certainly I'm willing to offer it for sale in the interim.
Yes, Mr. Cooper?
Thanks. So I've asked some questions, but I haven't really talked about how I feel about all this. This is a very conflicting position to be in. I feel kind of, in some ways, it's a bit of an alternate reality. One of my really good conservative friends sent me an email that concluded with, it would cost more to keep the present facility until a new one is ready to open, and it wouldn't be the cheapest alternative, but I believe it would be best for the community overall. And it's kind of what we're weighing here, because looking at the facts, and I know there's questions about the facts and arguments about the facts and the dollars and what can and can't we do. To me, it seems that closing or proceeding with a path towards replacing Mary Si is the most fiscally responsible thing we can do for the taxpayers of the borough. But I think that it leaves a huge hole in our services that we provide to our community, and I think that that is a huge problem as well. We can't accommodate all of you and all of the uses that you have and are enjoying at Mary Si with Hammy or with Westcott. I mean, there's no way around it. I think either option is a lose-lose for the community. One, we put more good money after bad. One, we aren't providing some services that are really important. I work up at the university, and I was talking to some folks in facilities up there about this and how come the university has buildings that are older than Mary Si that they haven't torn down yet. And the response I got was, well, because we haven't addressed this issue yet, but it's coming. And, just because other folks aren't talking about tearing down old buildings yet and replacing them doesn't mean that it's out there. And I think we've had some discussion last week and a little bit this week about the enormous deferred maintenance backlog that we're facing at the local and state level. I can't remember what the state's backlog is, but the University of Alaska Systems is over $1 billion of deferred maintenance, and that's a big number. It's a heck of a lot more than we're facing here. And look at the problem we're having talking about how we prioritize projects when we have so many buildings and activities and programs and services that are important to different parts of our community. I think part of the problem here is that we have a request to go ahead with demolishing something before we have a real plan in place to solve the problem. Yes, there's hope that the bonds will pass, and I recognize that the mayor has decoupled and asked us to decouple the bond from the demolition of Mary Sy. But I wish there were a way that the timing was different so that we weren't in this position. My preference would be to keep working towards finding alternatives. I guess I'm a little concerned about putting potentially $684,000 towards repair and maintenance at this point. I think that my preference would be to, proceed with the original request and authorize them to start working on the process to demolish, but taking the mayor at his word that he's going to come back to us before he demolishes it, and that gives us some time to think about alternatives. Because I think that taking demolition off the table now takes one possible outcome off the table. I can tell you that as of early this afternoon, I was actively working with other folks to find some alternatives to address this. So it's not like even if we approved the request for funds for demolition, that it's going to be demolished tomorrow or even at the end of the summer. I think that all the folks here demonstrate how important this is to the community, and I think that there's probably a better way that we can do this, but we should keep all of our options open. So it's really tough, and I thank everybody who has emailed, called, shown up for 2 meetings. I mean, this is the most people I've seen at an assembly meeting in months. So. And to come back on a second day, I think is commendable. So, I know that folks in this room probably don't agree with how I view it, but I appreciate you participating, talking to us all.
Okay, I have Mr. Roberts and Mr. Tacky and the mayor.
So I just want to point out that we can also decide to demo it at any point. If we find those issues, we do part of a deep dive, we do something, which, if we demo it, we're going to have to do a little work figuring all that out anyway, or it's going to be in the contract. If we don't do it, they're going to have to do a deep dive for some of this, and that's just going to end up in the money we pay. So we can do a little research and we can decide to demo it later once we have more information. Which is something we're severely lacking on. We have a lot of unknowns here, and I don't want to close a facility like that based on unknowns. Yes, we need to come up with some money, whether it's that amount or not. It's some amount of money, and it's large. But I'd rather move things around and make that happen and keep what I consider to be one of the more, I don't know if vital is the right word, but certainly for the segment that uses it, it's vital. It's hard to say that on overall scope, but there's the users of this facility really need what this facility has to offer. And while I don't necessarily think the borough should be in the business of entertainment, and that's not really one of our priorities. I mean, it's not what the purpose of government is. We're there. We took all their money. We've been taxing for years to make this work. And so we need to keep it going a little bit, use that tax money wisely, and not just throw this building away. And if we need to make that decision, when the deep dive is done or one of the deep dives is done and finds problems beyond the scope of what we thought there'd be, we can then make that decision. But I think this building still has some life in it, and we should get what we can out of it while we can. Thanks.
Mr. Tacky.
My comments are right along the lines of Mr. Cooper's. There are many steps that are to be taking place going forward with this, so we're going to see this again from the mayor. I think it's a bad decision to put an obscene amount of money into a building that's going down. It's dying. And I think that it's great to see that it touches so many people's lives, that so many people have come out here. It is, a lot of people have a huge emotional connection to that building. I was even talking to a friend today who had his swim lessons there, but he was like, swim lessons, I'll get over it, demolish it if that's what you think is the best thing to do. And I find it kind of like disheartening that, Mr. Lejeski uses elections as a way to, force someone's vote in making a decision on something like this, when really you should be voting for what is best for the community as a whole, rather than voting for a select sect and voting against your own political views, given the fact that, you're a fiscally conservative-minded individual. We should be making fiscally conservative choices that are good for our community.
Mr. Mayor and then Ms. Major.
So this facility serves a need, as was pointed out, and a very significant need, and Hammy and Westcott pools are a poor substitute. I would agree with all of that. Absolutely agree with all of that. As far as needing a clearer picture that we need to know about the seismic study, the numbers don't add up without it. If you can't afford a $100 wristwatch because you only have $80, then you don't need to know that the more expensive wristwatch is $180. You can't afford it, you can't afford it. And the best case scenario is we can't afford this. You don't have to take my word for it. It's got to come back to you. So it's not a matter of trusting me to come back to you about this before we tear it down. I have to. And so there's checks and balances in the system inherent in that. I wish the timing was different. It would be ideal if the timing was different. But if it's going to come down this summer, as we talked, we need to at least take this half a step forward in that venue tonight. What I need to know, though, that we really haven't talked about here is where is the money coming from to do this? So we need $2 million. or it's 1.995 or whatever, but 2 million is easier to say. We need $2 million this year, and then we're going to need another 2. So in trying to decide where that comes from, Mr. Roberts' suggestion was to take it from this ordinance, which would have meant we would be closing Pioneer Hall, and we would have most likely been closing Westcott Pool and keeping Mary Sy open. That didn't go through. So Westcott and Pioneer Hall are still slated for the work that's budgeted for them, and we'll move forward. We also have a significant amount of money budgeted for a number of other facilities in the very near future that are on the fence. We have buildings we know we can keep standing. We have buildings that are very seriously in need of some repair work in large denominations. And the rest of our budget is already set on these facilities. So the ones that are on the fence right now are the Civic Center, the Gold Dome, the Palace Saloon, the church at Pioneer Park, as well as Hammy and Westcott. And the one facility that I think is already over the fence, but we need to talk about it in the somewhat near future, the next mayor probably, I don't know that we can retrieve the Riverboat Nenana. And the historical, Tanana Valley Historical Foundation is already circling the wagons for a hard drive to come up with the money, ask you for the money, to keep that facility going. And that number is very significant, which is why I think it's probably not retrievable. And that's my favorite artifact in our system, and it pains me. But I can't print money. There we are.
Ms. Major.
So I feel like we've kind of been sort of pushed or forced into a corner on this one, and that's what I really don't like. Is it just kind of seems like, well, we've already taken the money out of the operating budget for next year, and so just I feel like the more we talk about this, the more it's like you guys don't have any options other than this one. And I do feel like we're we've had some discussion about let's keep all of our options open, and so let's change it from let's keep the original ordinance to demolition because it'll have to come back to us. But my concern is if we do that, then are we also losing our opportunity to do some repair and maintenance that we might need? And so I'm not in favor of keeping the ordinance as it is because I don't feel like it keeps all the options on the table. It just means that if demolition is what's decided, it still comes back to us for a decision, but it doesn't necessarily give us an option for some funding this year.
Okay, I've got Mr. Gray, then Mr. Roberts, and Mr. Cooper.
So as usual, Mr. Cooper has a way with words and said a lot of things that are better than I could say. Mr. Tacky also raised an interesting point that I kind of wanted to make. I find it interesting that I'm feeling more fiscally conservative than sometimes those that I would associate with being more fiscally conservative in a decision like this. But I think if, what I'm hearing is some are in favor of going back to allocating this money for the demolition. Others are in favor of saying, no, let's keep Mary Sy open. But I'm not hearing maybe there's another option, which is to vote this amendment as it currently stands down. And I'm not sure about going about this, but I'm proposing another amendment perhaps that says first we allocate a small sum of money towards exploring what's going on with the building.
Is that an amendment to the amendment that you might be considering proposing?
I thought we already had an amendment to the amendment.
No, we're back to an amendment.
I'm not sure if I'm prepared to make one, but maybe someone else wants to make one on the floor.
Okay, I've got Mr. Roberts and then Mr. Cooper.
So first,
Mr.
I was actually disheartened with the comment Mr. Tacky made when he was talking about his disheartening, because if you only look at the services that are provided to the majority of people in the borough, you might have the schools left. That's it. Libraries are right at 50%. So every building we have is serving a minority. Every building is serving their niche, their section of the community. So we don't make decisions just based on this is serving the majority because you'd have nothing left. And so I want people to think about that. And I want to be specific when the mayor asks where we're going to get the funding. I am fine with taking some of this money out of the general fund. As everyone here knows, usually when we get to the budget at the end of the year, while I fight the whole time to try and make it less, not being so successful this year, and that's partly my fault. But when we get to the end, I'm going to try to keep the taxes from being increased on the taxpayers. I do every year, and I'm going to try to take the money out of our general fund, which has grown up to the levels that we like it. And so we've got a little slack in there, and I think we can use the money from that to get through this first section of the Mary Sy. I don't think we necessarily want to use it for all of the repairs. And as I was telling you, the Facilities Maintenance Reserve receives money every year from our lapse funding, which is averaged in the last year for our total lapse funding, $12.5 million, based on a 7-year average. And I can't remember the percentage that goes in Facilities Maintenance Reserve, but there will be some more money, and we can keep this going. The bottom line is, if we say demo now, that means the service is over. It just stops, and the building may take a while to get demo, but it's going to sit there empty because we're going to stop doing the service. And so I want to keep that going for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. But remember that Mr. Roberts referenced the general fund on Saturday. So a question to the administration. If we allocated money for repair, maintenance, and/or demolition, does that give you sufficient authority to proceed with RFP process for both while keeping all the options on the table? I ask because what Ms. Major said I think is really the heart of this is we need to have options, but I don't want to hamstring you ultimately either. So will that give you what you need to start your process?
It certainly could, and I'm not trying to hamstring anyone. This came forward now because of the timing issue and because we're in the budget process. And this week, on Saturday, you get the rest of the picture from Public Works. Right. They're on your agenda. And that's when we need to have this discussion. Pick and choose what you want to do. That's part of Public Works budget. As you remember, we need by estimation and national standards, $58 million a year for facilities maintenance. $58 million. We have 5.5, less than 10% of that. And so we have to use every dollar of that very wisely. And that's why through the budget process on Saturday, you'll be taking a look at all of this so you have the whole picture before you to see how all the pieces fit together for a long 10-year plan. And that's why I think it's important to leave this on the table now so that it can become part of that budget process with all of the information.
And I think that's part of what we need to hear is the piece that's with the budget. So I am going to make an amendment. I'm going to move to amend the amendment as amended. To add.
We just like saying that.
That's right. How many ways can I work it in? To read on line 60, Mary Sy, Recreation Center repair and maintenance and or demolition.
Second.
Wait, there's a second part to that. Go ahead. Well, we'll do it that later. All right.
Okay, so I have an amendment to the amendment proposed that line 60 would read Mary Sy Recreation Center repair. I'm going to put a comma instead of an and. Repair, maintenance, and or demolition. Yep. And it was seconded by Minnie. Who wants to get it? Mr. Tacky seconded it. Would you like to speak on your proposed amendment to the amendment?
Sure. I think my comments that preface that, indicated my thoughts. One is I don't want to take any options off the table at this point. I think that we need to be prepared that so the second part, I was going to add extra money to perhaps do the initial studies. But if we go in and do a study and it turns that the thing has to come down tomorrow, I want the money to be there and the process started. That's what has to happen. I mean, I just don't want to take options off the table at this point, and I think that potentially gives the administration, timing-wise, the ability to go forward with RFP process while still allowing us to have a more full discussion beginning this Saturday at the budget work session and throughout the budget process. And if we go forward, some additional deep dive studies can be done and tell us closer to where we're really at.
I'm going to interrupt just for a minute and ask for a technical question of the attorney. When an RFP comes before this body, what are their options? So if an RFP for demolition were brought before them, what would their options be?
So you do have limited authority once we've gone through the bid process on bid awards, but if you decide to completely abandon a project, that would be one basis. What you can't do is basically say, I don't like this contractor, so I'm not going to award this contract and then have us go back out.
So they could say, the body could say, we don't want to do this project.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now we have on the amendment as amended, Mr. Roberts. I believe that's Ms. Major.
Well, I guess to the
Ms. Lawrence.
sponsor, I'm not sure I see the path here. This passes of how are we going to keep service going until we, this body, get to make the decision of which way we want to go? What, in the language you gave us, or where are we going to insert that language so that service will continue past the end of the fiscal year until the decision's made? I'm assuming it'll take longer than that to get the information.
I think that the answer is through the budget process. I mean, we have to make it. Right now, there's nothing for continued Mary Sy operation in the budget past the end of the fiscal year. So if we wanted to continue operations of Mary Sy anyway, regardless of this ordinance before us or this resolution before us, we'd have to take action on the budget to put that money back in.
Okay, and so to the attorney, so if we put this language in, then there's not a lot of intent language in here, right? We're talking about it a lot, but we're just going to have a line that says repair, maintenance, and or demolition. But who gets to make that choice? Once we've passed this, we've given the administration the money and this line dealing with it, and I'm assuming we're going to change the other line that's got the word demolition in it. Then who gets to make that decision? Is it guaranteed that the assembly would? Because the mayor's going to change out in 6 months. And so I want to make sure that we don't know what's coming on. I want to make sure that this assembly, which I'm not going to be on either, is going to get to make that decision as opposed to it being made administratively because we gave them some loose language.
Okay, so initially what process to move forward with and how to prepare the RFPs would be the administration's. That's their job. But I think what's kind of been pointed out is that the assembly has to make changes in this coming fiscal year's budget in order to execute the mayor's plan. So this body in its 2018-2019 budget is going to have to make changes that direct the outcome of this. So this will give them the administration authority to proceed with any of those options, repair, maintenance, or demolition, but they really aren't going to be able to execute on any of that until you adopt your 2018-2019 budget. Because they either have to operate the facility, so you'll have to put money in to operate the facility, or they're going to have to do other projects and you'll have to put money into that.
So if we put the money in the budget for the operations for the next year, and they had this line, could the administration decide that they wouldn't spend money because they don't spend all the money, they just can't spend outside of the budget, but we don't have anything necessarily stopping them from spending under the budget, and so could a future administration stop the operation and do the demolition because we gave them this line of code? Is there anything we need to do to make sure? Do we just need to put in some intent language officially? Is there something we should do to make sure that it's going to happen the way we'd like until we make another decision?
So I don't think through this ordinance you can do anything to guarantee the continued operation of Mary Sy. So, this is a facility maintenance reserve ordinance that's just giving authorization to spend money out of that account. So there's really nothing you're going to do in this that's in front of you to guarantee that.
Okay, so that means the money will be allocated, and because of the and/or, it could be used for demolition. And the only thing the assembly would necessarily get to vote on is when the bid comes forward for the demolition work itself.
Correct.
If it's even large enough, which I would assume it would be.
I'm sure it will be over $100,000, so I'm sure it will come before you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Major, do you mind if Mr. Cooper speaks on this point?
Sure.
Briefly on this point, I'd be happy to work with Mr. Roberts to come up with something that provided more direction on this issue. I think it would have to be a separate ordinance.
Mr. Roberts.
So I just want to say to the public, for those of you who haven't been to a lot of assembly meetings, if you've been counting votes, the vote on the amendment before this amendment was 4-4, at best 4-4. And so I'm going to vote on this, and I'm going to, if it ends up being passed, I'm certainly going to work with Mr. Cooper and through the budget session to get the operational funding in there and to try to work with the attorney to find a way to make sure that that the future administration recognizes the intent of the assembly and abides by it, and would come back to us with any changes or anything different that they want to do, and then this assembly could consider it again.
Thank you, Ms. Major.
So Mr. Roberts actually stole some of my comment, and I'd perhaps look at joining both Mr. Roberts and Mr. Cooper in that future discussion as well. So when I made the comment that it looked like we weren't keeping all options on the table by putting it back in demolition, I was actually questioning whether or not I should make another amendment to put both on there. I just wasn't sure if that was feasible, right? If there was a need for a specific intent, because as Mr. Roberts mentioned, I could tell that we were likely to split the vote, which would have meant that the amendment would have failed, and so I wanted to find a way to, I was just hoping to find a way to keep the discussion going. So I appreciate Mr. Cooper's amendment, because I do think it keeps options on the table, especially as we move into Saturday's budget discussion, and it gives some flexibility perhaps to the mayor to keep going without sort of tying everyone into one decision or the next.
Okay, I've got Mr. Lawrence next, and then Mr. Cooper. I have you back on the list.
Well, as I said before, I don't want to spend any more significant money on the maintenance and repair of this building until there is a seismic analysis. And I don't know whether this amendment to the amendment would allow for, it states repairs, maintenance, and or demolition. So, Ms. Dolan, does the mayor have authority to spend whatever it takes to have a seismic analysis done in the next few weeks out of the $682,000 if the ordinance reads as it would now?
You could. I think that's within the scope of, it's a pretty broad authorization that you're giving if you draft it that way, or pass it that way, excuse me. So I think he would have that authority.
Okay, well, this is just my opinion by myself. I would urge, if this amendment passes, I would certainly urge the administration to seek, an analysis or, a deep dive as quickly as possible, and not put any additional money including the water line, not do anything to that building until that analysis is back.
Mr. Gray, and then Mayor.
Yeah, well, I agree with Mr. Lawrence wholeheartedly. So you're not absolutely alone in that sentiment, Van. I think the two options inherent in this amendment are maintenance, repair, or demolition. And I would like to see, maybe if it's significantly less money than that $683,000, the investigative work done. And I think that would reassure probably most everybody in this room.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I just asked Mr. Sloan how quickly we could get this accomplished, and it would be 4 weeks or plus to get a report back, to do all the paperwork, to get it out to a consultant, and have him do the work and get it back to us. His estimate is at least 4 weeks, just so you know the timing.
Mr. Cooper.
To Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Gray, that was my intent. I was thinking that we could undertake a study and then we would know.
All right.
Okay, anything else? Seeing none, it appears that we're ready to vote on the amendment to the amendment. So the vote is, do we add and or demolition to the current amendment, Maryside Recreation Center repair and maintenance? Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Ms. Major?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Lojewski?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none,
6-2.
the amendment is amended 6-2. So we're back to an amended amendment, a very amended amendment.
Twice amended.
And that's what's in front of us, is the amendment. Any more discussion on the amendment? No? Okay. That's me deciding if I have a discussion on the amendment. Or proposed amendment.
That discussion.
Oh, Mr. Lojewski.
I guess in response to Mr. Tackey, some of what you said is true, I believe, in terms of fiscal conservatism and my position. But I do want to drive through to you guys, and I do have questions, I guess, for the borough attorney if it's relevant for how you go about disposing of borough property. Can it be done? I guess to start with that, can it be done just through a realtor on the MLS?
So that's not typically how we do it. Typically it comes to the assembly and they authorize land sale. So borough land's defined in Title 20 as land and improvements. So that would include a building. So you would set the terms of the sale if you didn't want to follow Title 20. We have, I think recently we listed on, I don't know if it was realtor.com. It was some type of an internet sale site so that it could be on the MLS.
Well, realtor.com isn't the MLS. They pull data from the MLS.
Correct. But they got, I can't remember the contract that Ms. Wagner had. Yeah, it's on there, and then they go to the internet sales site, like Realtor or something from there.
Okay. Are we, the borough, are we a member of the MLS and we can directly list stuff, or do you have to work with a realtor?
So,
Mr. Lojewski, we're on the amendment as amended.
Well, I would say this in terms of being wise with our money. If we have a building that's worth something, demolishing it for $750,000 is not fiscally conservative at all. That's the opposite. It's spending money when you could get money instead. So that's one of my points there. And then my other one is just kind of more personal. This is of no comment on anybody else in this whole room, but you can be fiscally conservative and also have a brain. So I guess that's, to me, that makes sense. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Cooper.
I guess just in terms of additional discussion, I want everybody here to know that even though, if we adopt this and demolition is still on the table, so is repair and maintenance. And I had a good conversation with some other folks today about other ways forward, and I'm going to continue to work on finding a solution that works for folks. So I don't want to see it demolished unless it has to be, but I don't know that we're there yet. So I just want you guys to know that that's where I'm coming from, is I'm going to still work towards finding a solution to keep it Maryside possibly going if we can.
Okay. Well, it appears that we are ready to vote.
One more comment?
Yes, Mr. Wojcicki.
Remind everyone in public comment, we did have a realtor come forward, and he assured us that, in his opinion, that building had market value.
Thank you.
It could be sold.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki.
No.
Mr. Tacky.
Yes.
Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Ms. Major.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge.
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none,
6-2.
it is amended 6-2, and we have the ordinance as amended back in front of us. Is there discussion on the ordinance as amended? Clerk, I think we're ready to vote.
Madam Chair, Mr. Tacky.
Yes.
Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Ms. Major.
No.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge.
Just the whole ordinance.
Not that I wasn't paying attention to. Yes. Would anyone like to? Oh,
Anybody changing the vote? You usually say
I
that.
was going to ask for count. Anyone wish to change their vote?
6-2.
Myself. Okay, doke. So it is passed as amended 6-2. That takes us to, does the body wish a break before? This is fairly straightforward, right, Mr. Roberts?
Yep.
Okay. So this takes us to ordinance 2018-09, and this is an ordinance amending chapter 8.48 FNSBC regarding hotel motel tax reporting and collection. It is, let me find it's on page 14 of our agenda. Pardon me. So, in summary, if the body doesn't mind, let me let everybody know what we did was, in case you didn't follow it, what we did was we adopted an amended version of this ordinance that says that the Maryside Recreation Center, we authorized $682,807 to repair, maintain, and/or demolish the Maryside Center. So that was what we just did. Okay. And thank you very much for all of your emails, your thoughts coming down and being with us last Thursday and again tonight. We appreciate it. And so we have more business to take up, so we're going to move on to that next business. Thank you. So we were at the ordinance. It's on page 14, and we start with public hearing.
Can I
Yeah, it doesn't say staff report, but I should think you would want to give me a staff report, Mr. Roberts.
save it on her copy?
Would you like to give us a staff report? Thank you.
So it's a simple ordinance brought forward by the fact that Airbnb, apparently in Alaska, doesn't allow you to separate the tax from the price of the room. So we have a requirement saying that you can't include tax in the price of the room if you're paying bed tax, and it doesn't work very well. For that situation, they'd have to do something really onerous and complicated. So I don't see a practical reason that we can't allow it as long as they do their math right when they report their tax and pay it. So this just removes the requirement to have the tax as a separate line item on a bed or on any hotel room rental.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to open public hearing on ordinance 2018-09, which is an ordinance amending chapter 8.48 regarding hotel motel tax reporting and collection. I don't have anyone signed up to speak on this. Is there anyone that wishes to come forward and speak on the hotel motel tax reporting and collection? Seeing no one coming forward, I'm going to close public hearing. Look for a motion.
Move to adopt.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Gray and seconded by Mr. Tacky. Assembly debate questions of staff. Do you want to say anything more, Mr. Roberts? Okay, I see Mr. Gray.
I'm just going to say, I agree. This is very straightforward. Fully support this. Adds transparency to the process for guests of Airbnbs. So, fully support this.
Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Major.
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki.
Yes.
Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Mr. Tacky.
Yes.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Ms. Dodge.
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none, 8-0. That takes us to 8-0. And with that, I'm thinking we might just take us a 7-minute break, and then we'll be back for citizens' comments, second bite number 5, and then resolutions. So with that, we are recessed for this. Hey, everybody. We are calling our meeting back to order, and we are on item 5, citizens' comments. And this is a second bite at the citizens' comments Apple, and this is for items that are not scheduled for public hearing. It's a continuation from earlier. It includes citizens' comments on items removed from consent, and we have quite a few of those. So it's for resolutions. It could be any of the resolution 2018-16, 2018-17, 2018-18. And that's largely what I would say we have in front of us. So I believe, no one signed up at this time. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on any of the resolutions that are in front of us? Then I haven't been very clear. Why don't you come up and take a seat? I have an empty sheet. Right, so do I have an empty sheet? No. Okay. So what I have is a list of people that have already spoken under this area. And that's just the first group. So did either of you speak on the Thursday night under this topic?
No.
Okay, super. Then you each have 3 minutes. I'll start with, well, you guys can choose who starts. So what I need is your name, and I need you to spell your last name, and then I need your neighborhood, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Richard Hughes, Hughes. I live in Hamilton Acres, Fairbanks. And I need to say that I think you need another major mine here to help boost your tax base. But I'm here to speak for James Barker, Barker, of Ward Cove, Alaska, who couldn't make it because of a medical condition. The testimony will be for Resolution 2018-18, the land lease resolution. Mr. Barker says, I am a project manager for the Treasure Creek Partnership, which is a legally joint venture of multiple mineral owners of mining mineral properties along the old Murphy Dome Road and northward to the Treasure Creek and Upper Creek drainages. Over recent years of geologic investigation, we have realized and have begun to define a significant exploration target that will warrant proceeding to the next level exploration and drilling. This type of work can be done any time of the year and conducted on 2 shifts on a 24-hour, 7-day-per-week basis. To this end, I was recently in Vancouver meeting with representatives of several international exploration companies who would be capable of financing such a joint venture. I submit the bill remarks because the proposed rural lease to be considered here tonight is for the purpose of a remote aurora viewing and lodging. The aurora viewing lease is on ground immediately adjacent to our principal exploration target. My dilemma, if you proceed with this action, is simple. Professionally, I will have to disclose your action/ordinance in any negotiations I engage in with outside exploration firms and or investors. It's a deal killer, to use the terms of the industry. Many good projects fail after major investments due to such land use conflicts. Consequently, the minerals industry is careful to avoid sloppy and or inconsistent land use agendas. During my career as a geologist, mostly in interior Alaska, I have also had training in and have worked with professional land use personnel. I urge this assembly to seek the resources available through the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. The Fairbanks Mining District is a tremendous asset to this community. It is the reason Fairbanks is here. The mining district is definable only a few miles wide. It can be zoned as industrial, whereas ridges and hilltops just a few miles to the north, to the west, or to the east can offer a vast northern landscape where we can enjoy the Arctic aurora. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Let's see if there are questions for you or for your friend. Mr. Tacky.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Are you aware that the property that's being improved upon is increasing the tax base in these years currently?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. I was curious, were you here last week?
I was here, but I didn't testify.
And Mr. Haltman, the lease applicant, testified. He indicated that he was well aware of the potential impacts on his property if a large-scale mine went in next to his operation. He was totally fine. I mean, he went on record, testified, it's on a recording, that he was okay with that. So given that, how does that impact the development of the mineral property near his place?
First of all, in order for the operation to proceed successfully, the lease property have to be removed. There's no way that a mine can operate in tight adjoining to a enterprise such as that. But first of all, one of the two of them is not going to go. The mining operation is going to be noisy. It's going to have light pollution, and that's going to contribute to a failure of the aurora viewing dog sledding event. No question about it. Or if the price of the aurora viewing dog sledding event and tourist facility is extremely successful, and the price becomes prohibitive, and the mining operation simply couldn't buy it out, or front loads the cost so much that they can't. It just ruins the economics.
And just a quick follow-up question: do you know whether or not the parcels that he's trying to lease are valid existing mining claims underlying those lease parcels?
According to the lease, the resolution, the land that was overlying the claims is being forfeited.
Thank you,
Mr. Roberts. Can I see your hand up? Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Hughes, what I'm trying to figure out is, and I take it you're in the industry, so the letter you read indicates that the owners of these mining claims, in order to attract financing, would have to disclose this lease. And this lease is not on the mining claims, it's adjoining the lease. How would that, disclosing the fact that there's a business that would not be, may not be compatible, or wouldn't be compatible with the mine, how does that impact? And you may not be the one to answer it, and Ms. Dolan may not be able to answer it. But what I guess I'm trying to figure out is why would investors care, as long as you have the legal right to mine that property? What do they care about some adjoining leasee having his business ruined?
We get back to the issue of a conflicting business. Although they're not in the same land per se, they are so close to each other that one is going to have a serious impact on the other. If the mine is started up, it's going to have an impact on the.
What impact does an aurora viewing or a dog mushing business have on the mining?
It would have virtually none, other than then it would have to be bought out by the claim owners.
Why?
And that would, I guess it wouldn't have to be, but there would sure be a destruction of the business, the aurora viewing business. Nobody would go to. Why would they want to? With that noisy pit next to it. So that means that's going to fail. No question about it.
Okay. So how does that impact investors investing in the mining operation?
I'm sorry.
Well, and I guess what I'm asking is, so you're assuming that this Treasure Creek LLC will have some kind of liability, or whoever invests in this mining operation would have some kind of liability to that tourist business next door.
Any responsible mining operation would have a obligation to satisfy its neighbors.
You think a legal obligation?
No, legal obligation, unless it ended up in court, and that would be to the courts to decide in that case.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
So, when they get to the point where they're doing an EIS for these large mines, do you know if they look at the economic impacts, not just the environmental impacts?
Absolutely.
Okay, and do you know if it was a similar situation? Because I don't know the details of the person who did some kind of court action when True North was doing it. Maybe it was just a protest or not a court action. I don't know any details on that, except that something happened there. Was that a similar type situation where they had a legal right to do it, but they had this adjacent residential maybe?
Yes, in fact, and that was Johnson up in the reviewing business at Clary Summit that protested the development of that property because there was light pollution on his business when the trucks went down the haul road to the current Fort Knox milling operation. And I don't think it became a court action. I think it was simply a permitting action.
Okay, thank you.
So we have Ms. Major and then Mr. Mayor.
In your estimate, or based on the information that you have, do you know about how long it will take before this the Treasure Creek property is ready to be mined, or for the mine to be set up?
I don't have any idea because I don't know what the exact stage of the exploration is right now. But the ordinary schedule for a mine of this potential is several years, up to maybe 10 years of exploration, and some of that's gone by, followed by permitting, feasibility studies, financing, and then commissioning of an operation. So the answer is from probably 8 to 10 years to maybe 15 years before something's commissioned.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor.
Thanks for coming down, Mr. Hughes. Obviously, the mine would have an impact on an adjoining piece of property because of the proximity. I'm wondering for long-term for the borough and looking at trying to avoid these situations, how much farther from the edge of the mine would you have this conflict with a user like this? That's
a really good question. I guess it depends a lot on topography and meteorology. I mean, what kind of conditions are going to exist to create noise and light pollution into an operation to a business of this sort? But you're probably talking up to a mile away where you're going to have an impact. I mean, the noise, you can hear Fort Knox at times from where I live in Fairbanks. I mean, it's 25 miles away. So what does that do? In fact, I think Vin said in his testimony, sorry, too loud?
No, I just have.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you told me to shut up here. I think Vin made the testimony in his last week on Thursday that some of the tourists mistake the Fort Knox operation for.
That's right, for the Aurora.
Forgot what he said. Aurora, that's what it was, yeah. Is that a noisy Aurora? Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Hughes? Next, Mr. Lajewski.
So I can ask a technical question of staff, right? If it's relevant to a question I'm asking.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm coming up with a solution. I'm basically asking if you think it might work, and the only way it can work is if the borough can lease this land with a stipulation in it that would give basically a buyout clause, an option to buy out the lease and end it early.
So you're wondering.
So I mean, I guess the question for the administration is that something that's possible, and is that something that might work with the mine? If you knew that there was this early buyout clause, and you could kill the mine or the Aurora operation for $200,000 or whatever the number ended up being, there'd be concrete finite.
Are you asking her or are you asking
me? I guess the first question is, can the borough do that? And then if the borough can do that, is that something that might sound workable?
So I think legally, when you authorize the mayor to enter into the lease, you could put conditions on what the lease terms would be. But that would essentially require a third party to be a party to that lease to because really what you want is to enforce it against the mining industry, not against the lessee. So you're really saying that you want a second contract there. You're trying to bind the mining industry. You're not trying to bind the lessee.
No, in this case, you'd be binding. This would be a restriction on the Aurora viewing business. So let's say the contract could say something like this: the borough can exercise a right to kick them off their lease early, but they must give them X amount of months of notice and X amount of dollars of monetary compensation for exercising
Well,
that
the borough
option.
would pay the compensation?
Well, the borough could ask the miners to pay it if the borough doesn't have the money. But I'm just trying to think of how to solve this. Both can
I'm sorry, I
exist.
thought you, I'm sorry, I thought you meant to have the miners pay that amount. Like, I thought you were trying to basically negotiate what the miners and the lessee would. So I don't think we can use public resources to buy out a lease for a private.
So could we
purpose.
have that contract, but no public dollars could be used? But if a private party decided to fund it and the borough agreed, then it could be exercised?
So they would have to also, I think that would be very difficult to enforce. That
You're
they
not
would
saying
also
no.
have to be a party.
Okay, so if you get the drift, is that, if we could figure that out, something along those lines, would that help?
Sure. Given that you could have a predetermined price, you heard what Sven said when that kind of question was raised on Thursday, and he said everybody has his price, which implied that he's going to be, if he's very successful, he's going to be asking for a lot of money. And that's really what we're getting around to. I mean, if we front load the dollars on a project, the economics go away, and it drives off investors. You all received a copy of the unabridged version of the letter I read. And the point is that this mining company or mining exploration company partnership is competing for financial resources worldwide, not just in Alaska or in Vancouver or wherever, Toronto or wherever it might be, but there are exploration companies all over, large ones that are looking for major projects. And getting back to my opening statement, which is supposed to be funny, sorry, can make you laugh, but in your mind, it could help you with the tax base.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Hughes?
Okay, one question.
Ask you.
Are you must be aware, are you aware that if the price was too high, the borough could refuse the lease in the first place? Could say no.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. I can't speak for Treasure Creek Mining. I mean, but generally, yes, I suppose. I wonder how you. Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming down.
Thank you.
We appreciate it very much. And we have an empty seat on the resolutions that are before us but not up for public comment if anyone else wishes to speak. And if you'd give us your name and spell your last name and tell us your neighborhood.
My name is David Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. I live in Vista Gold subdivision. I have no personal or business ties to the Treasure Creek Partnership, but I am in the business of mineral exploration, and I have spent 20 years promoting development of a valuable project that fortunately lies outside the borough, but it's not unlike the Treasure Creek property. I understand what the stakes are. I also have no problem at all with Sven and his business. It's a great idea, but it's just in the wrong location. Additionally, I recognize that there are people in the community who oppose mining. Possibly there are members of this assembly or employees of the borough who share this viewpoint. I wonder what Sven was told by borough employees that encouraged him to build a permanent home based on a 4-year lease. I really do. Or why the borough property manager did not feel it was important to adequately inform the borough of conflicting mining rights when you voted on the lease in the first place, in spite of borough code to the contrary. I wonder, was this incompetence or some other agenda, or both? Some of you may not understand how the mining world works or how valuable mining is to the Fairbanks community. The Fort Knox mine is the largest single taxpayer in the North Star Borough. The mine generates approximately 1,300 direct and indirect jobs with cumulative wages of $120 million annually and spends upwards of $180 million with Alaska businesses. Fort Knox is the largest Golden Valley ratepayer and saves every one of us approximately 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour on our power bills. Fort Knox is a major supporter of the university and many local nonprofits. Their safety and environmental record, like all major mines in Alaska, is exemplary. Few could argue that Fort Knox has been good for our economy. The point is that Treasure Creek property has a high potential to host another Fort Knox type deposit. Their operations would be directly in view of the Aurora viewing business. These are clearly incompatible businesses, and this is a major problem created by the borough. The partnership has invested up to $3 million so far in exploring their claims, many of which have been legally maintained for 40 years and more. A mine would generate hundreds of millions of dollars annually in our community. The bottom line is that no large mining company, the kind of company that has the resources and the will to build such a mine, will ever consider investing in a property that has a major built-in conflict right next to it, especially when the local political body made the choice to do that. Their investment dollars will go elsewhere. The borough already has a history of very poor property disposal decisions relating to mineral lands. Just think of Esther Dome for a start. I sincerely hope that the Assembly will give careful and well-informed consideration not just to this one really big problem, but to the larger question of how best to utilize the land surface endowment that the borough owns. You're tight on money. Another mine like Fort Knox would really, really make a big difference in the community. And you can have that or you can have an Aurora viewing business, but they can't be in the same place. And I don't know why that lease was ever made in the first place in that location.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Let's see. I have two questions. Three people. So we have some questions for you. We'll start with Mr. Cooper, and then we'll go to Mr. Tacky.
So I have a technical question, and I don't see Ms. Moda here, so the administration may not be able to answer this at this time. But are the structures on the leased property permanent, or are they mobile?
They're not permanent. I mean, there's no like slab on grade foundation type work. It's my recollection is the lease requires them to be able to remove everything at the end of the lease. And so while some of the structures, they're like my old 16 by 20 cabin on posts sitting on the ground with footings. So they're not tiny, but they're not permanently attached to the ground either.
A similar question I asked Mr. Hughes. So in this case, Mr. Holtman has said, I understand that there's a mine that you want to develop right next door to me, and I understand that might put me out of business in the future. If Mr. Holtman's going into this fully informed about the consequences of a mine being next door to him, how does that impact?
He knows darn well that there won't be a mine if he's there, or if there is a mine, that he will be able to get really a lot of money out of them to buy him out. And if him being there, you are helping him to extort from the mining company in a way. And I don't mean to say that I think there's anything dishonest about him, but he will be in a position to charge what he wants if there is a company that would even move ahead on the project. And my understanding, I haven't been there, but my understanding is that he's built a building on a concrete block foundation there.
I'll ask this as a question. I assume that you'd play the tape where he said he was okay with it if you ever tried to ask somebody to buy him out.
Yeah, sure he would.
I'd say the mining groups would. They would say, Mr. Holtman, you said this on the record, right?
Yeah, but it changes the economics totally. And the kind of companies that invest in projects like this, they'll go somewhere else. They won't even deal with that kind of a problem because they know down the road that could blow up into a much, much bigger problem. And the uphill fight that mining has a lot of places in the world, mining companies are really gun shy of even talking to someone in a situation like that.
Thanks.
Mr. Tacky.
Thanks for coming down. You spoke a lot about Fort Knox and seemed pretty informed. I was wondering if Treasure Creek has been looked at by Kinross Gold Corporation, and if they are interested in, it would seem like the most reasonable gold corporation is one that's already right here to invest into another major one if it actually is economically viable. Have they looked at that company?
I have no idea. I can tell you that my main project is next to a very large mine, and it's a very promising project. And even so, I've been working on it 20 years, and I'm only now working towards the point where it's really getting somewhere. So it's a long and hard road. I couldn't speak to what Treasure Creek's business arrangements are at all. I have no idea.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Major?
So as Treasure Creek looks to bring in more investors, looks to go from exploration to the permitting process, we heard it was maybe 8 to 10 years or so before we're to that point. When is the time that investors are really brought on, and when is that time that they're looking at the potential for conflict in the near area?
They'll be looking for potential for conflict before they ever spend a dollar. And their investment dollars come in at all points from early on. It usually starts with smaller companies and grows to bigger companies. And Treasure Creek is the smaller company that's worked to develop this property, but it's real hard to attract capital. And I see that as a deal breaker myself from my perspective as a small entrepreneur promoting a valuable property. I never could have gotten what I have off the ground if there had been something like that there. It would have been dead in the water from the beginning.
So if this lease were maybe extended for only 5 more years or 10 more years, vice the 20 proposed, would that be more appealing to investors or considered less of a conflict to investors?
I think that means it would be 5 years or 10 years before any investors would even look at it. I think you'd just be pushing it down the road. If you want to stop the possibility of another big mine, this would be a good way to do it. And that's why I'm offended that this is even happening myself.
So I guess I think it's tough for me to sort of weigh the risk, and I'm hoping if you were to put a percentage, because you mentioned you've been working on it for 20 years already, and it sounds like it's growing. There's still lots of exploration left. If you were to put a degree of confidence that this will really get up and running, what do you think that percentage might be?
That it will actually turn into another
Yes.
major mine? I don't know. I don't have enough information to know that. I know that it's a very promising property, though.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lajewski.
My question was answered.
Mr. Lawrence.
Well, Mr. Wright, good seeing you. It's Mr. Hughes in front of you, and you, I think, pretty much said that this is going to take a long time to pan out.
Yeah.
And what I don't understand then is if there's a signed lease, and I'll be, well, I think it's pretty clear that this assembly is going to shorten this lease term. But if there's a lease that is in writing that states that this adjoining business has a lease for another 9 years. You're saying that investors will say then, we'll just wait until 9 years before we think about this project?
They certainly might.
Why?
Because there are other projects all over the world they can put their money into.
But Mr. Hughes said that this would take 10 to 15 years. And I think Mr. Milne said on Thursday, 10 years. I've heard 10 years over and over again. So you're saying that investors in the world expect potential mining sites or, attractive mining sites just to remain completely void of any kind of development in perpetuity until they get around to investing in it, even though as opposed to being able to say, hey, this business will be gone in 10 years, and by then that's about when we would want to get the permitting done and start operation. So I'm not sure.
What guarantee would they have that the business is going to be gone in 10 years?
Well,
I mean, it's going to be another assembly and another assembly. Who knows what?
So how many mining? I mean, so it's the mining industry's position then that no development anywhere near a mining project should be allowed at all ever.
No, but if there is something that would be in conflict with the existence of the mine, which an Aurora viewing business certainly would be completely in conflict with.
Everything would be in conflict with an open pit mine. I mean, I don't know of anybody who wants to do business or live next to an open pit mine, right? So what I'm trying to grasp here is whether the mining industry is overstating the impact of a lease that is clearly stated to be for a duration that will end before operations can even begin. And you're saying that if there's any whiff of somebody utilizing property nearby in an inconsistent manner with an open pit mine, investors are going to stay away from it.
I think it's a real discouragement.
All right, thanks.
Any other guesses? Did I see your hand, Ms. Bludowski?
Yeah, so basically the question I asked before about the potential buyout termination of a lease option, that would still suffer, and I guess I'm asking this question, wouldn't that still suffer if we could do that? The same problem that the investor would then have to depend on the future decision of the assembly to exercise it?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, would a resolution from the assembly saying they plan to exercise it at the request, when a certain milestone or threshold is met, would that kind of balance that out?
It might. There's a real question of then what would the price be? How high would the price be? Too.
Well, I guess another question, what kind of capital are we looking at? Are we looking at 10 million, 100 million, 500 million?
For what?
For this mine, if it goes forward.
Well, if they do turn out to have what they think they have there, that the amount of investment they would make would be hundreds of millions.
Okay, so if a buyout clause ended up being in the couple $100,000, maybe that's insignificant compared to hundreds of millions of dollars, especially if it's specified up front?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would be.
Any other questions of Mr. Wright? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming down and for answering many questions. We appreciate helping us understand the situation. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on the resolutions? And there's an opportunity if you spoke last time and you want to speak for 1 minute. Now that everyone that wishes to speak has spoken, you may do that. Mr. Milne, welcome. If you give us your name.
1 minute, and I'll say Clark Milne, M-I-L-N-E, live in the Westgate area. You saw me not convinced that I should necessarily speak. I'm immensely pleased that you're grappling with this at the level you are. I'm absolutely serious. I think Mr. Haltman had a wonderful idea. Unfortunately, the Assembly didn't know about this conflict when it happened. He earned a 4-year lease. He legitimately got a 4-year lease as far as he was concerned. I think it would be a travesty if his operation ended up stopping a substantial mine, which it could. I really believe the mine's there. I don't know. The underlying point is the level of investment at the point right now with Treasure Creek is just the little guys, the juniors, and they're trying to draw in a company that's willing to spend $2 million so they can go to the next level. So it really is that way, Mr. Lawrence. But I haven't developed any mines.
Thank you. Let's see if there are any questions. I think Mr. Lawrence and then Mr. Tacky.
So when you say it's really that way, you're saying that the presence of a leasee for a limited term next door, when that term is less time than than operations could possibly exist, is still going to discourage, or it could would scare away investors?
Yes, let me phrase it this way. I think it could, and the could, I think, is unfortunately in the improbably high percentages, like 60 or 70 or 80%, that with that little pebble in the road, because it was mentioned, and you're right. If they were to build, essentially a Fort Knox, which I think they could, and the pit would be that way, it would be $1 billion mine. That's what it would take to build Fort Knox today. And in fact, I think I'm undersaying it. So why would you trip across this little pebble of 350,000, we'll say? It's because Treasure Creek doesn't have it, and they've been trying for years with the limitation of the international mining industry, which has been depressed since 2012, 2013. It's just now starting to come back. To a degree, they've been waiting for that to come back to try to draw them in, and actually in the last couple of years having a lot more interest. So I'm told I'm not involved. I have no fiscal involvement in this. Let me mention to you, you're quite aware, and I think virtually all the Assembly members are aware, I'm on the LMAC. I'm the chairman of the Land Management Advisory Commission. But I've been involved in mining. I left my state job at the DOT to work on mining with Dow for the last 5 years. This really is an opportunity, and it's just a super pity that the circumstances here, that's why it's so difficult to wrestle it out. I honestly believe, but I haven't done it, but participating with dozens of mining folks that are doing these kinds of things, like ITH, the International Tower Hill, and Pogo and Kinross, that this is the point they're trying to get past that level into going beyond the $2 million that they've already spent over the last 40 years. As I mentioned in that earlier testimony, they literally mined from World War I to 1927, etc. They pulled 2 million pounds of antimony and gold out of there, primarily antimony at that focus. So,
all right, thank you.
Mr. Tacky.
So I'm going to ask at the same time, thanks for coming down again, Mr. Milne. Do you know if Kinross Gold has actually looked at this plot of land? Taking a look, I mean, if there's a placer mine going on right now and there's actual numbers, they're not going to ignore that.
I think I'd have to say no, I don't know. That's the truth. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Cooper.
I didn't have my hand up.
Okay, I'm going to say, Mr. Gray, did you have your hand up? And
I did.
Mr.
I believe Mr. Millen answered my
Mr. Millen,
question.
right already.
That was that there is insufficient capital to perhaps make a buyout offer to Mr. Holtman at this time. So my question has been answered.
If I may, let me answer to that. I've spoken to both of the principals at Treasure Creek, which is Jim Barker that had done stuff, and Mr. Jewell that's written you a couple messages here in the last couple of days, talked to him several times, and he has voiced to me, so I know for sure it's his opinion that this would be a total barrier to their continuing and may just literally drop 5,000 acres of mining claims that have been held by different owners for the last 40 years. It'd be kind of a atom bomb in the midst of their long-term plans.
Mr. Lajewski.
So I'm going to ask a series of questions to help understand the point of view of the mining operation. So I'd start with saying, do you think that Sven and his business, that they're very competent businessmen and they're very smart? And
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then is it likely that if their lease is expanded, they're likely to become more successful and do even better?
Yes, I believe so. I believe he's the real thing.
And then following up on that, the more successful and more valuable that business is in that location, is that viewed as a more and more significant hurdle to the mine?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, and then Mr. Cooper, for real.
Thanks for coming down, Mr. Milne. So we have a few thousand acres in the neighborhood up there. If we try to relocate Sven, how far away do we need to move him?
I don't know. I don't know his business, but I believe he was correct. He mentioned that he had looked for 4 years, and he hit on a lovely location. I think there's more areas, but it's difficult to have that combination of resources that he needed to have legitimate road access and views, with not a lot of light, not much noise, etc., and not much price. So I think it would be difficult. It would be hard for him to relocate readily.
Well, he also said he didn't think the mine would be a problem, that if it eliminated his Aurora viewing, he was fine with that. The rest of his business was really where his heart was and stand alone financially. And so he didn't consider it to be a huge impact.
And I acknowledged he said that, and I think he said it truthfully. I think his heart is in this sled dog work. I think most people are coming for the Northern Lights, and then they're satisfied if they can do some dog sledding, even if they can't see the Northern Lights, because you can't promise that. But the two, once it's in action, and as I'd said, I think it would be 8 to 10 years. Let me mention on that. Nowadays, with Pebble, Donlin, it's about 25 years to develop a substantial mine in Alaska. But what I didn't say was they're already 15 years through that process. I think it would only be 8 to 10 years they could complete their reserves development and go through an EIS. To have the active mine, neither the mine nor MSHA nor Sven would really want a simple dog sledding operation, even though we'd probably develop some trails in that, to be immediately adjacent. What hasn't totally been voiced, but if you look really closely at the cross-section in that was sent, some of the richest portions of the deposit that's already been discovered is on the eastern end. That's part of the problem. If there's 5,000 acres, you're not going to mine all 5,000. Unfortunately, the mine is close to the eastern edge, and it would be visible. I've been told by the people that know that, the pit would be visible, and it would be a problem to have dog sledding that close. I think Sven could do it because he loves dog sledding, and his clients might do it, but it would be a complication and diminish his income.
Yeah, the pit would be viewable from space. So
yes, that's correct.
It would be that
Yes.
large.
That's what we want. Just as David
Wouldn't
said.
that even be a tourist attraction?
Yes,
I
sir.
mean,
yes,
in Arizona it is.
Sven was here. He would do tours of the mine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. Along that point, did you know one of the greatest parts of the gold discovery run is running past the lip of the Fort Knox pit?
Yeah.
Going up through the trails.
I didn't know that, but
okay. So I wanted to ask a question related to something that you said in response to a couple questions ago. That approving this lease would kind of be like an atom bomb in the middle of this mining operation.
Yeah.
So, and you might not know the answer to this. This is probably more a question for Mr. Barker and Mr.
Yes,
Jewell.
I'll bet.
Mr. Haltman's had this lease for 4 years.
2 years.
For 2 years.
Excuse me. I'm interrupting.
Sorry, no, that's
2
fine.
of 4. Yes.
2 of 4 years. But as we're here talking about lease negotiation, do you know if Mr. Jewell and Mr. Barker have talked to Mr. Haltman before now about ways to resolve this conflict?
I know they've spoken at least twice, Barker and Holtman. I don't think Mr. Jewell's been involved. And it didn't come to fruition. It was polite and friendly, but didn't result in anything.
It just struck me that we have an existing lease that is suddenly an atom bomb, so I just kind of curious why it's, how it got to that point.
Unfortunately, if you were to look at it, in the resolution to initiate the original lease in February 2015, it was not in the resolution nor in the staff briefing that the lease would be partly on top of a mining claim. Ms. Wagner knew, Ms. Woda knew, but didn't think it was important. She has told me at the time that it wasn't that big a deal because it was only partly and it was right on the edge of all that mining development. I think in that instance, that was a serious mistake for the borough. So the Assembly did not deal with this question in February 2015.
Thanks.
Mr. Roberts.
What was my question?
I don't know, the mayor wants to speak. Do you want to wait for him to come back?
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, along those lines of the discussion between Sven and Mr. Barker, didn't Sven move off of part of his lease as a result of those discussions to try to accommodate the mine, because there was actually an overlap of the mining claims in his lease, and so even though that was preferred ground for him, he tried to find compromise by moving to the east?
I admit I don't know. I'll tell you my impression. I didn't think that he was using that far western 4 acres, and I imagine, but I don't really know, I haven't asked Sven about it, that it wasn't as attractive. It's a little more downhill. He was hoping to actually stake out some dogs down there. Didn't become necessary. It's clearly the correct in this proposed resolution to modify the lease that he would relinquish that ground and then take a little 4 acres, retain 20, but move some of it to the north. So that's an indication that he was hoping to get rid of this really difficult split estate. Part of that reason is he's always trapped with the
superior rights of the subterranean, the subsurface, the mining, while that claim is in existence, takes precedence over surface uses. So if he had developed something, they could legitimately say, get that out of our way. And he wouldn't want to do that. He doesn't need to do that. It's not that those acres were so wonderful. So I'm not aware of him having a discussion on that with Barker. I don't know.
Mr. Roberts, do you?
Yeah. So, in creating a large pit mine, maybe during the whole process, but at least in the beginning, I would think that there'd be a lot of blasting.
Yes, sir.
Is that a common technique or a necessary technique?
Yes, and in doing the detailed exploration, you have to blast to be able to get down to some things to prove that you can have 5 cubic yards or 10 tons or whatever, and then send all of it to be assayed, not just a core.
I've only seen that kind of blasting on TV and not know how it works in real life. Do you think that that would be pretty irritating to dogs that are going to be near it for a lot of time? And for a lot of that
I don't know. Dogs and people, and then sirens, etc. You can imagine there's no one that lives very close to.
Are there a lot of sirens because of MSHA rules?
Yes. To alert any people that would be around, even though everyone's already been pre-alerted, etc. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mr. Lawrence, thank you for your patience.
No,
Questions? Okay. Any other questions at all for Mr. Milne? Seeing none, that was a long 1 minute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
And that means that also, if Mr. Hughes or Mr. Wright, if you also have a bite at the 1 minute apple if you want, or yes, you may.
I want to emphasize one point in the exploration.
Give us your name again,
My
please.
name is Richard Hughes, Hughes, Hamilton Acres, Fairbanks.
Thank you.
I want to clarify one point, and that is that during the exploration process and the development process, there's an awful lot of drilling, a lot of light pollution, drilling and blasting for test mines and those kinds of things that are easily permittable. The permitting process for that phase is simple, whereas for a major operation, which would follow, say, in 10 years, then that would take a major effort to permit, but for exploration, not. And I want to emphasize that that's a major disturbance and would create the possibility for Fly Rock to answer or to address his question. I had an employee one time that had his foot cut off with a piece of fly rock from a blast 3,500 feet away from the mining operation. And so you never know what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if there are questions for you. Mr. Lawrence has one.
Mr. Hughes, as far as that exploratory permitting, do you, and I suspect you don't, but do you know where they are in that process? I mean, has there been any exploratory work?
They're doing exploration right now, so they have to have a permit to do that. I don't know what the extent of that permit is.
Do you know what's the nature of their exploration?
Right now, it's assessment work. I would assume that, well, it's been some drilling and test pitting and sampling. That is evidenced by a map that was provided to us, along with the document that I read to you earlier. I don't have that document with me, but the assays are on that map, so that says that that's what's going on at present.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hughes? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming back down. Yes, Mr. Cooper.
I was going to point out that since we're on public comment for items not scheduled for hearing, I see that we have 2 members of the Board of
I was
Education
noticing
with
that
us.
too, yes.
And this would be the time if you wanted to speak to anything on the
Resolutions, if you wish to. Now would be the time, even though we've given the 1 minute warning.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that you knew this was your opportunity if you wanted to.
Thank you. So it looks like we're closing citizens' comments, item 5A, and we will move on now to Resolution 2018-16. I'm assuming you prefer to move forward without a break at this time into this. Okay. So we're up to Resolution number 2018-16, a resolution supporting a plan of capital maintenance, including an ordinance submitted to the voters authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds to finance all or part of the cost of these projects. The sponsor is Mayor Castle. It's on page 17. Mayor Castle, do you have a staff report?
Yes, we do. And I'll start off with, because there was confusion over why we had this resolution, because it's a resolution and it's not binding. We're looking at this evening because this is open and transparent government. This is a piece of the 10-year plan moving forward. In order to take care of the colossal facility maintenance debt that we have in front of us, there's no one way to fix it. It's going to take budget impacts, some of which are in our budget. It takes in-house work. It takes closing some facilities, and it takes creating some revenue somehow. And with a tax cap, we're not raising the mill rate directly through a tax cap. We're going to the voters with a bond package in this case. There are other ways we can also go to the voters. I had passed out a previous ordinance from about 16 years ago where we went for a vote, which is relevant but not relevant to this discussion or passing this resolution. The point being that we don't get where we need to go without some additional revenue to put into the equation. Now, the question becomes, so when you do a bond package or any of the other voter approved type changes, that is money that is added on top of the tax cap. So you're not raising the tax cap, you're increasing the amount of revenue that you can collect during the term of the bond. In this case, we're proposing probably 20 years. This is the opposite of a minimum funding level. This is a maximum funding level. So the way this is worded, by approving this resolution, it's an intent for us going forward to put together a package not to exceed this amount. We can delete things from the list, but not really add things to the list. And what I felt was important was getting this on the table so that folks understand in order to get where we need to go in 10 years, working with the tax cap, it is going to take some sort of action like this being approved by the voters. If they don't want to approve it, they're making the statement that we don't want to pay for these facilities per se, and it means without some sort of a bond package, we're going to have to take down more buildings in the equation. So we're trying to strike this balance with what comes down, what gets maintained, and what gets replaced. I'm not talking about tearing every building down and replacing all of them. Some do need to come down and just go away. Some need to come down and be replaced. Some need to be repaired. And so it takes a little bit of everything. And I wanted you to have all of the information in the package with where we are, because this is part of the budget. It's part of the motion that we just took earlier this evening regarding Mary Cy Rec Center, and how all these pieces work together, which we get to work on Saturday. And with that, I'd love to toss it to Mr. Sloan.
Thank you. So as the mayor mentioned, this resolution presents the second step in our capital plan, and look at how we address deferred maintenance in the borough. And this does put a ballot initiative in front of the voters in October, so to look at capital funding. The list of projects on this resolution were from the prioritization process that we talked about last week. They include general borough facilities, parks, and school district buildings. The total of all of these projects is a little over $77 million, and that does not include bond sale cost or interest. So that when we do the ordinance, those numbers will be included. So with that, we can just briefly run over the list of projects. Again, this is not a finalized list. It's just the general concept of how we're moving forward. The bond ordinance that will be put forth in June or July would obviously have the finalized list of projects. So with that, we've got, like I said, a mix of borough and school district projects. First one on the list on page 108, the Ben Eielson Junior Senior High School roof replacement. It's about a $4 million, little over $4 million project. Replaces almost 100,000 square foot of roof on that facility, plus the associated roof drainage. Second one, Chino Lakes swim beach access, accessible parking, picnic area, and beach access. So this just improves the area that we've already developed and provides restrooms, which they don't have now, ADA accessible pathways to the beach, and ADA accessible parking. Groudon Park skate park renovation.
Do you want to give us the amount on that?
Sure. That one was about $300,000. So I'll go ahead and give you the amount on each one as I go through. So the Ben Eielson was $4.4 million to be exact, and these are estimates, so I guess they're not exact. But Chino Lakes with $300,000. Groudon Park, and this replaces the picnic shelter, does again accessible pathways and parking, and then the skate park expansion and renovation, and that one is at $600,000. The John Carlson Community Activity Center, so this one's been on the list for years and years. Ice plant replacement, roof replacement, parking lot upgrades, and fire sprinkler modifications, and that one's at $11,750,000. The Lathrop High School partial roof replacement, and this is just the portions of the roof that have not been addressed yet, which is above the gym and the locker room area, and that's at $550,000. North Pole Fifth Avenue Park, this is just a small project, paving the parking lot, accessible parking, and accessible pathways, $250,000 on that one.
You skipped the aquatic center.
Oh, I did. How did that happen?
Freudian, I think.
Yeah. Well, that was a little more than $250,000 for the aquatic center. I did. Okay, so the aquatic center, that is as we've been discussing, obviously a new aquatic center to replace Mary Cy and Hammy pools, about 45,000 square foot estimate at this time preliminarily, and that is scheduled or budgeted at $35 million. Okay, and then moving on to North Pole Fifth Avenue Park, that was the paving the parking lot and accessible paths at $250,000. I guess I went out of order on. Oh no, I guess animal shelter would be next, would it not? Yes. So this is a replacement for the animal shelter. As you know, we have an aging animal shelter that we're trying to figure out what to do with. We did do cost estimating recently on repairing and renovating that building, and it came out so close to the cost of just replacing the building that it was much more financially feasible to replace it, and that's at $17 million. And the rifle range safety berm, shooting platform, and accessibility improvements. This is the rifle range down at Tanana Lakes. Definitely, again, as a recurring theme, ADA accessibility, ADA shooting platforms, significant improvements to the existing berming, and that's all about safety right there, and it needs some work. That project was budgeted at $225,000. Next project on the list was overall school district electrical and communications upgrade, and that includes emergency electrical communications associated with the infrastructure, HVAC, emergency generators, transfer switches, and VoIP. And that's a $6.3 million project. And the last project on the list, Tanana Lakes Recreation Area, Swim Beach, restrooms and shelter development. So this goes into accessible pathways, restroom facilities, and picnic area at the Swim Beach. And that project was at $700,000. So the total of all of those projects comes up to $77,075,000. And that will conclude our staff report.
And
To adopt. Second.
Okey doke. So it's been moved by Mr. Cooper, seconded by Mr. Tacky, and Mr. Roberts has his hand up.
So on the school district-wide electrical communication upgrades, so they preceded us in upgrading a lot of their equipment. And when I think of a VoIP system, I think of the kind of stuff you buy when you're doing computer upgrades, and the school district handles their own computer facilities and has their own department. And I'm wondering, what are we doing getting involved with their VoIP system?
This would be the infrastructure, so it's still a capital, upgrade for wiring, Cat 5, Cat 6, whatever. Just the same thing that we had to do with a lot of ours that were Cat 4 or Cat 5 or whatever. Now they have to be Cat 6E, and I'm not an expert on what those mean, but so it would be
Just
upgrading.
infrastructure. It's not the VoIP appliances themselves.
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. And this is a question from Ms. Dolan. What's the legal effect of this resolution, since we'll still have to have a bond ordinance in front of us later in the summer?
There really isn't one. It's more of a statement of intent by the Assembly to help kind of frame how to move forward with the bond election ordinance, but you have to pass a separate bond election ordinance in order to send this to the voters.
Right, and so we could, assuming we adopted this resolution, our eventual bond election ordinance could include projects in addition to these, fewer than these, different than these, all
Correct.
of the above.
You are not bound to this.
This is just expressing, here's the plan that the administration has presented. It's like you said, an intent. Here, go forth.
Correct.
All right, thanks.
I have a question for staff that Ms. Dolan has heard a few times. I'm just struck by a similarity between this list and their descriptions and the Mary Sy Rec Center, and I'm wondering how a Mary Sy renovation would not fall under this, wouldn't fall also be potential on this bond.
I think that's one.
Yeah, I'd like, Mr. Stone, do you have a technical answer to that?
Well, no. I mean, we have, as will be presented and is being presented in the budget, there is a 6-year plan that shows the deferred maintenance and all the capital needs for all of our facilities. I think it's a policy call on where it is, that the money that we do have is invested.
So that's not my question. My question is eligibility to be on the bond.
That's probably a legal question.
Answer.
Okay, or the mayor, if the mayor.
Yeah, it could be bonded for sure. It would have to. So the key with it just needs to be a project that adds more to the life of the building than the length of the bond. And so we have to be careful with that. The work that's included, we need to make sure. But most of the renovation at Mary Sy could be bonded. Most of those multi-million-dollar projects could be. The reason it's not is that an aquatic center is the much cheaper way to go than trying to bond Hammy and Mary Sy as repair projects. The cost goes up significantly. We have a poorer quality facility when we're done as far as the amenities that it can provide, and higher operating costs, which is why we didn't put that in the bond package.
Thank you. See, Mr. Lawrence.
If all the repairs were made to Mary Sy that were deemed necessary, and really this is more Mr. Sloan, how long would that building last before you had to put more money into it?
So we have an estimate right now of investment needs that would extend the life of the building for 10 years. So I don't know what after 10 years, what would need to go into it at this point.
Mr. Roberts.
Well, I'm sure there might be some amendments coming forward, but I just want to speak to this. One of the things that did disappoint me when the budget came forward is that there was such a focus on maintaining the level of service. I believe, as I spoke earlier today, that what we are doing is unsustainable. And this infrastructure that we're not maintaining is because we have so much that we're trying to put out. We're trying to do so much, and it's not sustainable. We can't afford the buildings, the infrastructure, the operational costs. So I don't see how we can bring this forward to the voters when we haven't tried to lower the amount of services, the cost of those services. Right now we're looking at facilities and we're trying to pick and choose between facilities, but is that really the right approach? Shouldn't we maybe be choosing between services and then seeing what facilities are needed to support that? And so I'm looking at this and we're going to go above the tax cap. We're basically going to give people a tax increase to put a bunch more buildings in that we can't sustain. The amount of money, you said 77, that's slightly under a year and a half of what the mayor said we need to be doing based on that yearly amount. So does that mean in a year or two we got to come back with another bond this size and we got to keep doing it every other year? How's that going to add up? How's this community going to afford that kind of money? Eventually, they're just going to say no. And so then you don't have a plan to cover this maintenance, but you keep keeping all of the services and all of the buildings that you can't maintain. There does have to be some decisions made. And I'm glad even if I didn't agree with his decision, I'm glad he made a decision and he brought some stuff forward. I'm in full agreement that something needs to be done. And so we're all talking about a plan now, and we'll talk about it a lot Saturday. But I can't support a bond issue telling the voters we're going to raise taxes, even just bring it to them, letting them choose. I know that's always what people want to talk about. But we haven't done anything to ramp the services back to a level that's sustainable in this community, in the economic times that we have and that we can foresee. So we've got to do something better, and I don't think a bond issue is the way to do it, or even the alternative issue that we all got that email from Nate Dean with an interesting idea. I thought it was interesting. But it doesn't fit with what we're talking about the needs are for the maintenance. There's got to be something else. We have to break somewhere and say, okay, we can't do everything for everyone. We have to at least go closer back to what the powers originally given to us by the people were with their intent. We've gone way beyond the intent on most of those powers that they gave us, and we've expanded operations. We've grown the kingdom. We've built it out. We're doing all these great services, and every service has their user group and their niche, and we all hear about it when we try to cut them. But this just isn't a functional way to do business. So while I'll be interested in any amendments that come forward, I think I'll be voting no ultimately because I don't think this is a proper way to do the kind of planning we need to do. Thanks.
Mr. Lejewski.
Yeah, first thing before I say anything, just question on conflict of interest. And I should have said this earlier, but I'm trying to be more careful about it. So I could and I have once taken guests as a road tour operator to Chino Lakes. I don't think that's a problem, but I just wanted to bring it up before I say anything else.
Okay, well, look at the clerk. It doesn't seem the same. I mean, the attorney. It doesn't seem like that.
Yeah, you exclude kind of those de minimis contexts when it's just a generally held interest that all of our taxpayers held, which I think Chino Lakes is sufficient to say that it's a generally held interest and that you don't have a financial interest in whether a bond happens.
Yeah, and I could actually think of arguments why I'd want it to happen and not want it to happen. But at any rate, I won't be voting based off of those ideas. So what's the typical bond term for these? 20 years, 30 years? 20. And could it be different? Could we bond one for 30 and one for 20? Or
We can.
Okay. And then also,
The key is to whatever you're building with the bond has to last for the term of the bond. So
Right.
you couldn't build a building that's
That's what it is.
projected to be torn down in 20 years with a 30-year bond.
then if these get approved eventually, because it's like this is the first informal approving, I suppose, do they go on the ballot as one lump sum, or are we splitting them up into individual ones so the voters can pick one by one, or what's the deal with that?
That's why we're having this discussion, because this is kind of a maximum level with one lump package, and we get to talk about, do we want to break it into multiple packages? Do we want to delete things? This is sort of a maximum level, and I felt open, transparent. Let's have the discussion and talk about what we all think about this and work through the complexities.
Okay, so we have the option, like we could do all of them, or we could do all of them as individual on the ballot, or whatever.
True.
Okay. And then along those lines, come back to me, I forgot.
Okay, Mr. Lawrence.
On that question, as far as whether we're going to combine all these projects or various projects into one bond or divide it up, that's not an issue we have to address tonight, is it?
No.
Okay, good. I'd like to respond to what Mr. Roberts said, and I give Mr. Roberts a lot of credit. He'll take positions that aren't popular, more so than most of us will, I think. But when he says, well, we should focus on reducing services and less so on facilities, I note, and I suspect he will respond with an example or two, but I note that he didn't mention any services to cut, and I suspect recreation might be one of them. But we saw what happened last Thursday and tonight when we tried to reduce services for senior citizens and disadvantaged or disadvantaged, physically impaired or whatever people and children. We saw what happened. Okay, so if you think reducing facilities is going to be a problem, us reducing services is going to create a lot of attention. Whole lot of attention. And I give this mayor credit, I give the previous mayor credit from my perspective in providing services as economically as possible. And so, I think that the big issue this community has is whether we're going to look forward to the future or just and invest in our future, or just say no, we can't spend any money. We don't know how we're going to pay for it. So, these projects here is what makes this community worth living in. We get college hockey, we get parks, and if we don't invest, and I have real problems with the city of Fairbanks because its mentality has been, since I've lived here for the last almost 40 years, is that, and this is more so in the past than currently, they didn't, Fairbanks didn't invest in any big projects. It didn't, even when the state was offering to pay some of it. And I think this community has less to offer because of that mentality. And I don't want to continue it. I want to invest in our future. So I'll be voting in favor of this resolution tonight.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, just a quantity comment. If the entire list was approved, the annual payments on the bond would equate to less than 1 mil increase in the mill rate. Okay. So that's kind of the scope of volume that we're taking a look at. A number of the projects were in code violation at different facilities for not being ADA accessible. So a lot of those that were mentioned as accessibility, those are code issues for us, just to make that clear. And I take exception to some of the things that Mr. Roberts said about we just need to ramp back services and look at cutting services. We have done some of that. We've eliminated some hours at the library. We've cut some bus routes back, and they have significant impacts. And we have certainly heard from some of the users in that regard, and quite vocally, too. There's a difference, too, between cutting a service without an option and just saying we're going to cut the service. What we've suggested for Mary Sy users is that we're going to have a temporary reduction in service and displace the service to other facilities for a period of time, and then there is hope for a new process. So we're not cutting a service. We're decreasing its quality for a short period of time and then hopefully replacing it. And you see how folks love what we do at all of our facilities. It ain't any different at the other facilities, trust me. We're looking to lower costs. This plan is the cheapest plan for going forward with operating essentially Mary Sy and Hammy into the future. I mean, it is a cost savings for the people in this community. It lowers our operating costs because of the efficiency of the building, the efficiency of staffing, utilities, et cetera, and the initial upfront capital cost. It's the cheapest way to go. So I'm trying to lower costs here. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. It's the same with the animal shelter. We're trying to lower the cost because the building's not big enough to do what we're doing. Our staff is split into multiple facilities because they don't all fit in there physically and whatnot. And so instead of spending almost the exact same amount of money putting repairs on it, we spend a very small additional amount of money, but dramatically increase the efficiency of the operation. We go into code compliancy. We meet standards for care of animals that we currently don't have, et cetera. It's a no-brainer. And overall, if you look at 10 years, it's the cheapest way to go. I'm trying to lower costs. And over 10 years, this is lowering costs the most effective way. So don't think that we're not trying to be cost effective and efficient here with this. That just is absolutely not true. As far as your comment regarding the yearly amount, that this exceeds the yearly amount, this exceeds the yearly amount of maintenance. We have an equal amount of money we should be putting into capital every year. We have a $100 million deficit when you look at capital and planning for the future capital needs and the replacement of our buildings. So it isn't more because this is some of this is capital and some of this is maintenance. And when you combine those numbers, this is still below the target. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper.
A quick question for the mayor. You mentioned that the increase, if we bonded for the full $77 million, would be less than $1 million increase. Can you translate that into dollars per $100,000 of value, just for our benefit and the folks listening, roughly?
$100 per $100,000 is $1 million.
Okay, Ms. Major.
So I guess, Mayor, you've said it earlier, and I probably just didn't catch it as much as I had liked to. I know Ms. Dolan had mentioned that this isn't binding, right? That this is just a resolution to support a future ordinance and not binding. So can you just help me understand really your intent for bringing this resolution forward to us now?
I want the public to be aware, and this is a public meeting, and folks are listening, and we keep being accused of trying to hide stuff or, cover up numbers or whatever, and I am totally trying to make this as transparent as possible. I have been for a year now, and folks didn't listen to the sandbox meetings, they didn't listen to our other community meetings, yada, yada, and so I want to get this out there because I want the public to know what we're thinking about, what you're thinking about, and look at the whole package of responsibility here. I'm trying to put together a 10-year plan to not have a significant reduction in services. I don't think we've overbuilt to the extent that Mr. Roberts says. I think we can have all the services that we historically have had at a very reasonable price to the people in this community. Our mill rate is currently well below average for what we've had over the past 20 years. And so to say we can't afford to add 1 mil to that, it still keeps us way below historic numbers when our economy was rolling and growing under those tax burdens. And so, that's an evaluation that you need to be part of, which is why I'm bringing this here to initiate the discussion. And hopefully you'll get more comments from your constituents on all of this. And as we go forward, we'll be able to put together a bond package that we all have some buy-in on, because this shouldn't be just my decision, and it isn't. Ultimately, you need to approve the package that goes out anyway. And so I don't want to waste my time or anybody's time here. We want to hit the nail on the head with the right kind of package that we feel appropriate for our community. So I'm kind of asking for guidance, and I'm also trying to get the community engaged in understanding that we're looking at this and why we're looking at it.
So if I can, just one more. Do you have any concern that if this resolution doesn't pass, that there's the potential that a future bond ordinance might not pass either the assembly or be, or have win the vote, be supported by the community?
Well, if it doesn't pass tonight, it's going to certainly send me back to the drawing board because obviously my plan isn't going to work. And so now I'm going to have to come up with a new plan, and I'm not sure what that would be, but I guarantee it's going to include taking down a number more buildings because we just won't have the money. This brings us $77 million into our maintenance problem. If we don't get that injection of money, then I got to come up with $77 million from somewhere else. That's a pretty big whack. That means a number of other buildings come down, and you can start with the list that I read earlier. We'll probably lose all of those.
I guess I would just hate to say that, that all of that, I guess it's sometimes listening to the discussion, it's almost like we're talking about it like it's a done deal, right? And I guess maybe similar to earlier discussions today, there's still so many steps in the process. And I think that's what I'm just trying to reconcile is, the discussion we're having today. And I absolutely appreciate your intent for bringing this forward to keep the discussion going and get constituents involved and make sure that future bond ordinance is what it needs to be.
Mr. Lajewski.
So I'll start with the one I forgot before. So it's a kind of financial bonding question. So I'm just kind of wondering to myself and thinking, well, if we did some at 20 years and some at 30 years, would that increase the overall cost of bonds because we can't sell them maybe together as the same package and lose some economies of scale?
Well, each bond package, there's administrative costs associated with it. So the more you break it up, there's small additional costs from that perspective on it. The advantage of changing the years, I'm not so sure because a 10-year plan is going to require another bond package in 2 years and another bond package 2 years later, or we don't get to the finish line. So we're that short on money that we need all of this. This is step A. And so changing the terms on it, if you push this out to 30 years, then that would constrict or make it more challenging to do another bond sooner. There's going to be more cost because you get more interest for another 10 years, so your costs go up also. But it would make us adjust the overall steps in the process going forward with other bond packages.
Is there, then along those lines, is there a savings in the interest rate if they are combined rather than sold off as smaller bond packages?
There's lower administrative costs, but there wouldn't be an interest savings necessarily. I mean, that just depends on who's bidding on it. I think when the package gets real small, it does interfere with the interest rate, so it depends on how small you're talking about, because most of these bonds, 50 million is not even a big bond. If you get down into hundreds of thousands, if you're trying to do one on every one of these packages, I think that would increase the interest rate. But it kind of depends on what the market's doing. There's a lot of variables, and I'm not a banker.
Right. And then we could vote on them individually as the public, and then combine when we actually sell them as one bond for the ones that pass. No?
That one I don't know the answer to, and Peggy is here from finance, and she's frowning, so I'm not sure she has the answer
Just to
either.
give you all context, I hire bond counsel because it gets very specialized, and then our finance department actually hires a financial advisor that they work with. So a lot of this is really determined by those professionals, and we don't determine some of it in-house, like the interest rate and things like that. They go and talk to their financial advisors about what terms and things. So I think that's part of our struggle.
Yeah, I would say you really don't want to bond for less than $10 million at a time for different projects. You don't want to break it up to small pieces because for each sale and each issue, there's
Like a broker fee or?
there's cost associated with everything. So we'd want to try to sell in groups because then also with the interest rate, it's what's the market bearing and what our rating agencies rate us at too. So the interest is it's the timing too of when we sell.
Okay, then I guess I was going to ask the mayor and her staff to help me do a quick back of the envelope calculation. So I forget if we could restate how much money, fresh capital money, would it take to bring us up to kind of a happy capital situation in terms of deferred maintenance?
This amount.
That's it? No more?
So, as I've said, I have a 10-year plan to get us there. It's going to take 10 years to get us there. How much do we need now? Because there's no way we can bond everything now. That would be, 3 mils worth of payments. That would be less than that. But I don't think that's a wise way to do it. So I'm looking at 10-year steps with the largest bond up front, and then a smaller bond in 2 years, and then a smaller yet bond 2 years later, maybe 3 years later, because we're overloading our public works department because they have to manage all these bonds. And so we got to see how they're going with the workflow on all of this, and where we are with exactly when we go to the next bonds. We also have to spend them timely, or we get into arbitrage issues on the financing. And so we have to pace it. And my plan is this one this year, and then 2, depending on how we get rolling on this. And I think we're going to be okay, and Dan thinks he's going to be okay to 2 years later come out with a smaller bond package. Might be 3 years. And then we'll see how that goes, and then 2 or 3 years after that, another package that's a little smaller. So maybe 77 this year, 55 in 2 years, and 40 in 2 years after that, in that neighborhood. That combined with some fee increases that people don't like, some more reductions chipping away at some of the services around the edges of all of this, which folks don't like. All of that combined gets us there over 10 years to where we're in a comfortable position, not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but comfortable where we probably won't have to. And that 10-year plan at this point also includes, and I hate to say this, but the riverboat Nenana just goes away.
Okay, so the numbers you stated were 150 to 200 million or so bonds overall once we get them all out. Of course, they'll be paid back, right, principal, as soon as we start using them.
Right.
Then the other piece of the puzzle, how much do we collect for every mil of the tax rate?
8.5 million.
8.5. So this is, so let's just say 200 million spread out over 20 years plus interest and other things. So, okay, that's enough for me to get a rough estimate.
Thank you, Mr. Tacky.
My question's kind of pointless at this point. Good.
Mr. Roberts.
So I think the mayor misunderstood my point when I talked about the year and a half. I was making the opposite point, saying if I believe he used the number 58 million that we need to put in every year for eternity to keep up our maintenance. We just need to keep putting that money in. And now he's brought up the capital, so it's actually 100 million a year. So this bond doesn't even cover 1 year's worth of needed money. So if you did that every year, and it was just under a mil, and you kept doing that for the 20 years of the first bond, and it would expire, of course. So if you did it for 20 years, you did it for 10 years, you're looking at 8 mils. Maybe say it was 0.8. He said it was under 1. Say it was 0.8. Now you're at 8 mils extra. This stuff adds up quick. Now, he's just stated that that's not his intention. His intention in a few years to do 55 million. Well, that means, so we're 22 million short this year, even with this, and then we're 23 million, and then we're 100 million short next year, and then the next year he said 55, so we'd be 45 million short that year. So it's getting some work done, and that's great, but it's not sustainable long term for the maintenance level that has been stated by the administration that we need. I just want to make that point. You can't tax enough. There's no way you can cut around the edges of services to make up that kind of money. You can't just do little cuts around the edges and suddenly come up with hundreds of millions a year or 100 million. It's, as you know, our whole budget's 165. So I hope you guys think about the math on that, is that you can't catch up with what's been stated for our maintenance needs as needed doing this type of system. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cooper and then Mr. Lawrence.
I guess just starting off, this is not the bond election ordinance. This is a roadmap, and I think as a general roadmap, I support it. It provides an outline of where we think a reasonable direction to go is, and I probably say this to my detriment because in the future when we have a bond election ordinance that includes different items than those on the resolution, people will be asking why. But I think that this does give some intent for the community to respond to and say, are these the projects that are most important to the community? I agree that being upfront about what we're looking at is really important, especially as we're dealing with this. I think that some of this talk we've had about Mary Sy was a result of that kind of transparency issue, and not saying that the mayor didn't try to get the information out there, but at least a perception by the public that they didn't know exactly what was going on. So, I support it. I think that it's good to talk about what we ought to do in a bond package. And to bond, bonds, generally, it always strikes me that, this is not us raising people's mill rates by adopting this resolution or even by adopting the bond election ordinance. It's asking the citizens in the community to vote on it. And really, that's like, bottom line democracy, right? Like the people in this community get to decide whether or not they want to pay $100 extra a year for 20 years. I know that property values go up, and so that goes up too, but just generally speaking, people get to decide what they want to pay for. So if we have a carefully crafted bond package that really reflects the values of the community, then perhaps it gets approved. If it doesn't reflect the values of the community, then it doesn't get approved, and we don't bond for it, and we go a different direction. So I think that putting this question to the citizens, to the voters, is a good idea. I think providing a roadmap before we get to the bond election ordinance is a good idea. So I support getting this process going and moving forward.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, in response to Mr. Roberts, I acknowledge that this bond issue isn't going to solve our problems. We're going to have to, like the mayor said, we're probably going to have to reduce services. We're going to have to shut down some buildings. But the point is, if we don't at least give the residents of this borough an opportunity to invest in some of these buildings, in some of these facilities, then we're going to be shutting down a lot of stuff. And I'm not clear on what Mr. Robert, what his point is. I mean, if this bond issue doesn't solve everything, then we shouldn't try to do it at all. I don't get that. I think this is an important step. This is an important ingredient in trying to get this borough back on a stable situation where it's got adequate facilities that aren't costing us an arm and a leg to maintain, and it's going to give the residents an opportunity to make some choices. By not passing this, by not going forward to a bond, with a bond this fall, all we do is make things worse, much worse, as far as what this community, what this community has to offer to its residents and to anybody who might want to move here.
Mayor.
I hate to say this, and it's not because I'm trying to hide anything, but in response to Mr. Robertson, yeah, we need to work on all aspects of this, and this doesn't solve the problem because, it's $100 million a year. So we need to reduce that need, and so the first step in reducing the need is Mary Sy Rec Center. The second step in that is probably the Riverboat in Indiana goes away. The next step is Hammy Pool goes away as the Aquatic Center goes up and is more efficient, and then the Gold Dome goes away. So now we don't need $100 million a year. You can take a big chunk out of that because right out the get-go we need $20 million for the Riverboat in Indiana. So now we don't need $20 million anymore. We're making a cut there and saving all of that, which is a big chunk of change. And we're getting rid of about $250,000 to $350,000 a year in maintenance on the riverboat that would be required going forward, depending on how we deal with that situation. So the point here is it takes a little bit of everything to work into the 10-year plan. So there is a reduction in some services and facilities out there, and what I've said is I'm trying to minimize that and impact the least number of people. So when you look at visitation numbers to the Gold Dome and visitation to the riverboat, there's small numbers there and large costs. The same with Mary Sy, small number of visitation, large cost. So those are the bigger saving items, both from the financial side of it and the impact of the community side of it by numbers, just doing the math work. And so word, is getting out, and I don't want to fire people up over the riverboat and the Gold Dome and such, but that's part of the 10-year plan. And depending on whether or not this bond package passes and or some of the other budget things, we're going to need to add more to that list if we don't have revenue. I think we get there with the path that I've laid out. And because I got to compliment our Public Works Department, we beat national averages on a variety of things with our maintenance. And so the numbers that I've given you are what national average expectation would be for maintenance on facilities, and we don't necessarily have to have that. To do a reasonable job of maintaining our facilities, and I think we do a darn good job. That's why we still have those two pools, as I referenced earlier, where the other ones of their vintage are already down elsewhere. It's because our guys do a darn good job with what they have available. So I think we get there. Thank you.
Mr. Tackey?
I just want to say I agree with Mr. Cooper and Mr. Lawrence. We got to move forward with putting this to the voters. I mean, this is just one step in moving towards actually providing sustainability for our community and our buildings and the facilities that we have. And this gives the voters that option. So I'd be voting in support of this and would do it soon if I could. But I have a question also for legal regarding ballots. And it goes back to the question that Mr. Lajewski had asked a little bit earlier, and Peggy didn't quite answer it, was whether you could actually have a ballot that listed out all the projects and voters could vote yes, no, and then at the very bottom you have that's the new total.
I'm fairly certain you can, although I'll double check with Bond Council. But we used to separate out the school district projects and the borough projects, but that was mostly based on the anticipated reimbursement on the state projects. But I don't know of a legal reason you can't, but I can check.
But those would still be separated, though, actually separated, right?
Correct,
Right.
like two
So those
different
ones are clear.
questions.
Yeah.
But
those
I
ones
don't know why you couldn't. In fact, I think I've seen it structured before where there's more than one question on projects. So you could group similar projects together. Like, for instance, you could group together your Parks and Rec type projects or your schools or, but I can verify with Bond Council if you wanted them all to be separate, like a menu of choices, basically.
Yeah, and that's
but I
kind
believe those are all going to be separate questions then. It's not like you can go through the list and say yes or no.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Now, Ms. Major.
So I just want to echo Mr. Cooper and Mr. Taki's comments. This is really us right now saying we support a future ordinance that helps address deferred maintenance issues or new capital projects. And I do think, as Mr. Cooper stated, this is an important step in the public policy process to be able to get our constituents to talk with us so that we can shape what that future is. And so I guess I don't feel like we're necessarily debating the merits of a bond right now, but more so really getting after bringing the community involved and determining whether or not a bond is even the right way to go in the future.
Mr. Roberts.
So, in response to Mr. Lawrence, it's not about whether we need this bond and whether we can do good things with it. I was talking about the overall 10-year, 20-year policy that we're basing this on and our maintenance needs. Now, the mayor had a good response, and I can acknowledge the math in that response and how it's going to work, even if I'm not sure long-term. And I mean, I really stated that long-term you can't sustain it all, but certainly he brought up some good points. And in fact, it made me think and really come up with a question for the administration. Most of what he mentioned was at Alaska Land. And of course, you can cut those because you're not cutting services to the community with most of Alaska Land. You're cutting service to tourists. And so you can get away without cutting services by taking down or not doing anything with the buildings there because they're not servicing, generally not servicing members of the community. And so, at least not in a large way. And so I'm wondering if the administration has looked at maybe selling off the park that maybe we shouldn't have taken from the city. And if they've even looked into that aspect, because there are plenty of people in the tourist business around here who might find that a useful place and be able to use that effectively to still build up tourism, have a draw for people, allow it to be a public place, rent out the Pioneer Park Hall like is being done, and that might be something viable for people as opposed to, I do think it might be hard to find somebody to privately run a small pool like that. But the entire Alaska Land Pioneer Park might be something that you could do that with. Just an idea. Thanks.
Mr. Lejeski.
So I forget what the number is, but and I'm assuming we have it calculated. What's the total value of the capital improvements that the borough has? Parking lots, buildings, et cetera, et cetera. Do we have an estimate of that?
It's over $1 billion, isn't it, Dan?
Over the next 20 years, yeah, our 6-year plan, just for the next 6 years, we're showing $279 million.
Well, I'm talking about like what we have now. What's the value?
Value of all of our
It's
buildings.
over $1 billion. Yeah.
Is that like the summation of the new cost as they were built, or like a rough estimate of current market value, or?
That would be the replacement cost.
Okay, replacement cost. So that's based off of engineering reports. Okay, so $1 billion. So I guess to get to Mr. Roberts' point, the back of the envelope calculation, someone feel free to correct me if you think there's something wrong, but if we did about $200 million of bonds over 20 years, I'm getting that should raise the mill rate about 1.5, and I did an estimate for interest in there too. I don't know if that sounds about right to everyone, but I'm probably the only one who did it, but 1.5 mils per year for 20 years. You give me a funny face there. So to Lance's point, or Mr. Roberts, yeah, so that means we'd have to do these 5 times if we thought the buildings were going to last for 20 years, the capital improvements. So I guess it kind of depends on the duration of the capital improvements. If we think we need to do this every 30 years, 40 years, right, on average. But I could see how you could end up raising the mill rate, 3, 4, 5 points overall to maintain what we have. So I think that is his concern, and I echo it, and I think it's valid.
Mr. Lawrence.
So I asked Mr. Lejeski, Mr. Roberts, what's the alternative? You're saying that if we spend money to try to preserve or replace some of our facilities, it's going to ultimately increase the mill rate, and you're right. So are you suggesting we just don't spend any money on facilities and keep the mill rate down? What's your alternative?
That's a question for me. You notice this is the first time I'm kind of penciling in the numbers, and I haven't had enough time to think about it to come up with a concrete alternative for you.
All right. Well, I'd be interested.
Any other? Yes, Mr. Roberts.
Well, that is a subject that would require a lot of specificity, detail, and time, and so I won't take the Assembly's time. But broadly, if you think of ways some of those debt plans work out there, where you work on paying the biggest or the smallest, and you hammer away, when you pay that off, you take that money and you pay off the next one. Think of the maintenance that we haven't been doing as a debt. And so as you lower your operational costs and you keep taxes the same, you take the extra money generated from lowering the operational costs and you apply that to maintenance and to you're making it more efficient, because eventually you are going to replace buildings. You're going to do improvements like we do with insulation to get some efficiencies, and you keep taking the extra money and you keep pouring it back into your buildings. And if you do it right, and you will have to lower some services. So how much is a question, and not necessarily that easy to come up with off the top of your head, but you can work into it and pay off that maintenance debt eventually. And I think the mayor's trying to do that in a particular way. I'm just not sure that you can do it and still maintain the level of services. That's where we disagree, is on how much services can this community support implementing a plan like that. So that's it.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm not advocating a fire sale, but I am more than willing to investigate the possibility of selling almost any of the buildings in question here if we can maintain the service. If part of the sale is that we'll keep operating. But I'm real confident we're not going to get a lot of takers in that when we try to lease buildings like over at Pioneer Park, we can't keep our cabins full. We really struggle with that because they just don't turn enough revenue. For a lot of businesses, it takes a real good business model. There's some over there, and I won't mention names because I'm not going to advertise for anybody, but there's some businesses that have been there for 20 or 30 years. They got a great business model, good location, yada, yada. It works great. Some of the other cabins, we have a new person every year if we can get a new person in there, and then they go belly up. So as far as selling these facilities, I don't think we're going to see a big rush on it, and I also don't think we can just sell them all for $1 unless somebody's committed to operating the facility and keeping it available to the public because we have an asset that is worth something there, even if it needs some repair work. But I'm all in favor of looking at options for having other folks, nonprofits, come to us and try to operate facilities. We do that. I did it at Parks and Rec all the time, and we've got some shining examples of this working. We also have some shining failures where it didn't work. And so it depends on the group and their interest and their abilities. And we would weigh all of that because anything that could save us $1, I'm in favor.
Mr. Roberts.
Yeah, I was thinking with Pioneer Park that of an actual all-out sale and to somebody in the tourist industry, and I think that they would be more aggressive than the borough is or even can be in marketing those venues, and they might put in the capital necessary to even attract more investment. So I think there's certainly a possibility there, but I might be willing to buy that little building out there with the PM 2.5 monitor and the piece of the hill it's on. If you want to sell that to me, I think I can get some investors.
I thought that you might have something like that. Okay, anything else on this, Mr. Lajewski?
Okay, so back to the idea that we have maybe about $1 billion of capital improvements. You mentioned the other night 4% of the value or the repair or replacement cost. That's what you need to be putting into the building on an annual basis or whatever it is to maintain the status quo. Is that sound about right?
Okay, so there's national standards. It depends on the type of the building because obviously a warehouse doesn't need as much maintenance as the hospital does. And so the amount of money that you need to put into maintenance on facilities ranges from 3% to 6%. And so each building that we have would fall somewhere within that range, 3% to 6%. Go ahead and pick a number in there. This building obviously is higher than a warehouse facility.
Right. So I guess back to Mr. Roberts' point again. So if we have $1 billion and let's just use 3%, that means we need to be spending $30 million every year into our buildings to maintain them. That's almost like funding another school district.
That's why we gave you the number $58 million because we're not using 3%, we're using 4%. And so
I didn't know how you got it originally, so it didn't mean as much to me. Now it does. So anyway, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Clerk, I think we're worn out and ready to vote.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Lajewski?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Major?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge?
I go 50-50? Okay, yes. Anyone want to change their vote? Seeing none?
6-2.
It's adopted. 6-2. Okay, I think I second the break. Let's take a break for 7 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that you were busy. I would have waited.
Okay, now we're done. And we're back.
Okay, we're back from our very short recess. Thank you, everybody. And we are on to resolution number 2018-17, a resolution specifying the minimum amount of money to be made available from local sources to the Fairbanks North Scarborough School District for school purposes during fiscal year 2018-19. The sponsors, Mayor Castle. It's on page 19. There's additional information in yellow folders. I think I need a staff report before I give you a motion, Mr. Cooper.
I guess a question for the clerks. I was
So
going
excited.
to make a motion with regard to this resolution. We do that before or after the staff report?
And usually after.
We should have the staff report.
Yes, we should have our staff report first. He's very excited. I promise I'll call on you as soon as the staff report's done. Mr. Mayor, do you have a staff report?
Well, as you're aware, we need to do a minimum contribution resolution within 30 days of receipt of the school district's proposed budget request to us. And so we're within that window at this period of time, and you need to decide what minimum amount of money we would guarantee would be forwarded to the school district this year. As you're aware, the budget request that came from the school district was $50 million, which is $1.1 million less than last year. And I put the $50 million request in my proposed budget. And then subsequent to that, a few assembly members had chatted with me and asked about what number I might be putting in a resolution to come forward here. And they expressed an interest of having some level of wiggle room to at least have a discussion and precipitated discussion regarding a number of different fiscal issues with the school district. And so I put in, through the course of this, nothing has been secret. I had 2 meetings with the administration from the school district. And then I followed that up with an email to the superintendent regarding all of this before it was public information, that the number that we had settled on, or that I had settled on to put in here as a starting point for discussion, was going to be $41 million, which is about $10 million less than last year. Make no mistake, I am not advocating that that be our contribution to the school district, but it does provide us a starting point for discussion here for setting what would be an absolute minimum. Historically, we've used a higher number, $1 or $2 million less than the proposed budget from the mayor. And this lower number is in response to questions and concerns that there might be a need for more wiggle room, reflected by the discussions we've been having all night about us not having any money. Part of that leads back to looking at the unrestricted fund balance of the school district and the money that they have available. Their unrestricted fund balance is actually larger than ours. And so that begs the question, what should their fund balance be? What should ours be? There's lots of variables here. And I think the concern over some of that is what precipitated the questions as to giving more wiggle room for this resolution. So that's how we got to the number. And I just do want to reiterate that I am not proposing that be our final number, but it does allow latitude in the discussion going forward, both now and through our budget process. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cooper has a.
Okay.
He was, okay.
I move to adopt resolution number 2018-17, a resolution specifying the minimum amount of money to be made available from local sources to the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District for school purposes during fiscal year 2018-19.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Gray. Mr. Cooper, now.
All right, now I've been eager. I'm going to move to postpone consideration of resolution number 2018-17 to the regular assembly meeting on April 26th, and if I get a second, I'll discuss it.
So it's been moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Tackey to postpone resolution 2018-17 till April 26th. Is that correct?
If I can speak real quick to that.
Please speak to it.
Just as all of you are aware, well, first of all, you received the email from Board President Haas that there were other meetings tonight. Then, even though we have some school board members here, not all the school board could be here. But I think more important than that is the fact that we have scheduled a very important work session on Thursday to address some of the very issues that the mayor has discussed as part of this resolution, including a joint meeting with the school board and administrations to discuss fund balance and other fund equity. Probably backwards, equity in school district funds, as well as the continuation, because we couldn't finish it last Thursday, of the school district's budget presentation. So I thought it would make more sense to have a discussion on this resolution after we can have those discussions.
Yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Question for I guess for Ms. Dolan is, we have I think the mayor mentioned we have a 30-day time limit. When was the budget presented to us, school budget? I mean, it's April 26th, within that month?
It goes by the date you received it, which it was due by March 30th. Do you have the date? Oh, sorry. I was looking at Peggy.
It was received in our office, the first big batches of it, on March 30th, which was before their April 1st deadline on Sunday.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Okay.
I support the motion.
Mr. Roberts.
Do I have to speak completely to the postponement?
I think so. It's on the postponement, but you can probably weave in some of the reasons for the postponement. Yeah, why you would or wouldn't support it.
Well, okay. Well, I guess I'm not against the postponement. I'm not going to be here on the 26th, so I won't get to discuss it. And I was just going to mention how I thought 41 was fine. Historically, as the mayor addressed, it's only been the last half dozen years that we've had high numbers in that minimum. In the far past, we had extremely low numbers, and it never mattered because the budget number is what matters. But it gave flexibility to the assembly when they go to their budget meetings not to be tied. So I was actually fine with the resolution that I was, but I'm fine with postponing it.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Lajewski on the postponement.
This question might be partly for the clerk's office. If we pass this today and a nearly identical resolution was brought forward with maybe even a different number, but otherwise identical, how long would it take for the identical resolution to come forward?
You would be more advised.
Would it be outside of the 30 days?
Yeah, we couldn't before. Why would we bring an identical resolution? We have one. This is.
You'd be better advised.
I know,
to
but
amend
once we go through the finance meetings, we might decide we have a more firm number we can go with. And
you can amend the education and the finance committee meetings.
Yeah, it's in the budget that matters.
On the 21st, you can still go up. This just says you can't go down.
This is a floor. So if you wanted to lower the floor, you can do that.
Okay, so I did get the email, and there's just a respect issue to delay it. But other than that, I'm struggling to see the practical reason for postponing.
I can speak to that.
Please, Mr. Cooper.
Well, I think the answer to your question is two-part. One, the practical reason of postponing is that on Thursday we're going to have a pretty robust conversation about some of the issues that are underpinning the mayor's proposed number in the resolution. So I think making a decision about what the minimum funding level should be should take those discussions into consideration. I think the second part is the actual budget number, the appropriation that's made to the school district is through the budget process. So it's two separate issues. This ordinance has a lot of whereas clauses that discuss, this resolution has a lot of whereas clauses that discuss fund balance, and we need to talk about fund balance. We need to talk about that with both boards present. The actual budget is going to be the amount that goes to the school district. So.
I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, on the postponement, any other discussion? Clerk, I think we're ready to vote.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Ms. Major?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none.
0.
It is postponed 8-0, postponed until April 26th. And that takes us to Resolution 2018-18, a resolution authorizing the mayor to amend a lease on borough-owned land located in the south half of Section 14, Township 2 North, Range 1 West, Fairbanks Meridian, Old Murphy Dome Road. The sponsor is Mayor Castle. It's on page 26. And this item was removed from the consent agenda by Mr. Assemblymember Roberts on April 12th, just for the record. Mayor Castle, do you have a staff report?
We certainly do. We'll go to our land manager, Sandra Mota, for the report.
Good evening. And my apologies for not having been here earlier for the citizens' comments. I was not aware that I could provide technical assistance during citizens' comments. I thought I was limited to staff report, but I will make up for it now and answer any and all questions. So the lease, as we've noted before, is on Old Murphy Dome Road. It's immediately adjacent to the pipeline corridor. So here's the pipeline corridor. The lease is the red dot there you see. The green hatching is borough-owned surface. The red dotted squares are all mining claims or leasehold locations. Where you see the overlap of the green and the red, that is borough-owned surface and mineral claim or leasehold location under it. This area is zoned GU1. And while that is the case, recognizing the existence of longstanding mineral interests in the area, we actually approached the industry with a proposal to rezone. Under Title 18, there is a possibility to rezone to ML, mineral lands. And so as the subject matter experts on the value of the interest in this area, we proposed, I think the first time we proposed it was July 31st, 2015, when we met with Alaska Miners Association, Mr. Barker, who represented Treasure Creek, Mr. Roberts, I believe, was present. There were a number of other key figures from the mining industry present at that meeting. That meeting was held specifically to address concerns the industry had regarding this lease. And so at that meeting, we proposed that they help us initiate a rezone of this area. And my notes from that meeting say that the participants were not interested in this, I quote, because of the public process. So here we have the same area. Here's the same pipeline corridor. In this case, this is a state of Alaska depiction of the mineral interest and our interests. The hatched in blue, horizontal is our surface estates. All of the claims here have their numbers, which help us track who owns what. And then so where you see, this is the mineral claim designations. Where you see the heavy blue, that's the overlap of our surface with the mineral claim or leasehold. If it's staked, so all of our borough land comes with that mineral reservation. The state reserved its mineral interest on our land. If it's staked before we took patent, before we owned the surface, it's a mining claim. If it's staked after we took the patent, it's a leasehold location, which means that before they can actually have a mine running, they will have to get a lease with the surface owner. The bulk of these are, in fact, older and predate our interest, so they are mineral claims. So in terms of ownership, I think citizens' comments last week, Mr. Milne indicated that this area had been dormant in terms of mining since 1977. That means it has been dormant for 40 years. There was considerable investment by the owners of the interest in the 90s, in the early 90s, and this in the several hundred thousands of dollars as far back as we can tell. The current owners are, as have been mentioned here, Treasure Creek Partnership, which is a venture of two separate corporations, the Oro Grande LLC and the Goldstone Resources LLC. So Oro Grande was registered as a corporation with the state of Alaska in 2014. They are entity 100244792, and they are currently non-compliant with the state of Alaska for failure to file their biannual report. They purchased 77 claims from Silverado Gold Mine in 2014. And they're basically, all of these, it's hard to see the numbers, but all the ones that say MC and start with the number 3 is basically the Oro Grande claims. And then there's Goldstone Resources, which registered as a corporation with the state of Alaska in 2006. These parties who hold these interests are required to declare annually to the state of Alaska how much money they have spent in these claims, or on these claims. We went as far back as 1986, which is what is available online through the Recorder's Office and the state DNR website. As far as we can tell, public record indicates that Oro Grande has declared $33,000 annual labor between 2014 and 2017. That's the total for those years and the total for all 77 claims. Goldstone Resources has declared $29,000 in annual labor between 2013 and 2017. I can specify, I can go through each report and tell you exactly how that money was spent, surveys, reports, analysis, soil analysis. Additionally, the state receives a lease payment of $170 per 40-acre claim annually. So, for example, Oro Grande, 77 claims at 40 acres each, means they pay roughly $13,000 annually to the state. So in 2015, the Assembly adopted Resolution 2015-07, which authorized a lease to Spence Alaska LLC to operate a seasonal recreational tourism business, hosting activities such as dog sledding, northern lights viewing, and others directly related thereto. It was a 4-year lease. This was the term the leasee requested. It was issued at fair market rental value, and the lease, the resolution itself included a fairly detailed development plan which specified exactly what the leasee intended to build on that property. I bring this up because there have been some questions about whether the leasee built exactly what was authorized, and the answer is yes. As you can see, he was authorized to build 4 Aurora viewing yurts. He was authorized to build a equipment generator shed. He was authorized to install electrical junction boxes and electricity to the structures. He was allowed to construct 3 10 by 16 dog handler cabins and a larger 26 by 26 2-story round block cabin to function as a caretaker facility. The lease terms do not limit dollar investment on the property. In fact, the lease says, I quote, "Approval will not be withheld except where proposed construction does not comply with all valid engineering principles, fire or building codes, or the proposed construction is inconsistent with the purposes of the lease." The leasee retained legal counsel at the time who reviewed the lease before he signed. He understood that per the terms of the lease, at termination, that was 4 years unless renewed with approval from the Assembly, and with written notification from the borough, the improvements not removed from the property at that time would revert to the borough. The borough gains ownership of the improvements if he does not remove them at termination. The leasee also understood that he took the property as is, subject to, and I quote, this is in the lease, all covenants, terms, and conditions affecting the lessor's title to the premises. So this includes the mineral reservation that we are subject to. Again, I stress, the leasee had legal counsel review the lease for him. Notifying the leasee of mineral claims or other interests at that time was not a requirement in FNSB code. We did not only not inform of mineral interests, we did not inform of easements or any other third-party interests because it was just simply not our practice. We expect leasees to do their due diligence. We reduce our liability by not potentially omitting something if we go down a laundry list of interests. Where mining claims are concerned, I would point out that Yukon Title itself, an authority on title, when they do their title reports, unpatented mining claims are excluded from their reports and from their insurance. Part 2, reservations, exceptions, Part 1, number 6. All unpatented mining claims are excluded from their report. Our position has been, and continues to be, that until there's actual mining activity occurring on a property, there are no constraints on the borough's ability to make full use of its surface rights. That includes the right to convey any and all of our interests in the surface to third parties. It's also our position that anyone who is developing mineral interests on borough surface is required to make provision to pay the owner of the surface estate for all damages sustained by the owner of that surface. So not only do we not have an obligation to notify the mining claim or leasehold location holder of what we intend to do with our surface rights, the mineral claim holder or the leasehold location holder has an obligation in law to notify us, to make arrangements with us before he does anything on our surface. I will say that I have no mining use licenses or any such agreement with these parties with these mineral claim interests on our land at this time. No one from Oro Grande or Goldstone Resources has at any time approached us for a mining use license to do anything on our surface. I'd like to also clarify that when land management evaluates, because now it is in code that we have to look at third-party interests impacting or impacted by, that's in code now, I would still say that our analysis does not extend to perception of risk by potential investors in any one particular industry. It is not, we're not subject matter experts in either tourism or mining. I cannot say whether I believe or don't believe that an investor in mining is going to find the Aurora viewing a problem, no more than I could say that a potential investor in Aurora viewing is going to find the mining a problem. That is just not part of our analysis. And so here's what's proposed today. The leasee has requested modification and amendment to the lease area and an extension of the term. An extension of the term because, as has been said, he is ready to invest more in this property. He's currently at $188,000 assessed value. He wants to put another $150,000 this summer to stay competitive in the market because it is a very competitive market. He is also proposing to shift the lease area to remove the surface leased area that overlaps the mining claim and replace that same acreage to the north. And he does this, and you heard him last week, in good faith, because he believes that both of these interests can coexist. And because he was actually called to a meeting, there was a question here earlier about whether these two parties had ever spoken. And in fact, as far back as 2015, he was asked to meet with Mr. Barker and a number of other parties to try to come to resolution to see what could be done. And I was told from that conversation, I have this from Mr. Haltman, an email from Mr. Barker dated August 11, 2015 that went out to a number of people, including Mr. Roberts, I see here, that says, and this is, I'm going to quote from Mr. Barker, from this meeting, we discussed possible resolutions that both sides could live with. In the end, correcting this situation will require borough action to at least to reconfigure the lease. This was Mr. Barker's proposal. So Sven is honoring that by proposing the change. In exchange for reconfiguring the lease, if mining permits are eventually sought by Treasure Creek Partner, the individual partners, or their designees, I committed to a mine design using berms of waste rock and surface stripping material as much as feasible in the western part of the property so to minimize the impact upon his northern lights viewing. Berms would be placed along the eastern margins of mine operations to block or at best minimize lights and equipment noise. So clearly, Treasure Creek Partner felt at the time that some kind of compromise was possible. And so I believe that Mr. Haltman proposes this in hopes that Mr. Barker and Treasure Creek Partnership will honor what they said back in 2015. I think I will conclude my staff report and answer any questions that I may.
And I would just like to add that both of these parties came and spoke with me, and I suggested that they chat. When I originally spoke with Sven, he said that this reconfiguration was a little bit problematic for him in that you can see the clearing, which is the fire break along Old Murphy Dome Road, and his original lease was all cleared over into the mining property there, which was advantageous for him. And moving his property to the north, you can see it's all treed, and he would incur some additional expenses potentially in utilizing that. And I said, well, think about it. We need to be good neighbors, and we ought to be able to figure out a way to work this out. And so obviously, and then I had no further discussions. I had spoken with Mr. Barker also about let's see what we can give and take to get to an agreement that works for both of you. And I think they both contributed to those discussions. They both made concessions, and they both operated in good faith to try to come to a resolution. And I like it. Personally, I think it's a give and take situation. And frankly, I'm just a little bit surprised to hear the opposition now coming forward after what I thought was good faith effort by both parties. So that's what got us to where we are today. Thank you.
Okie dokie. So that takes us to looking for a motion to adopt.
Second.
So moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Tackey. And I see hands. We'll start with Mr. Lawrence. And we'll go to Lejeski, and then we'll go to Mr. Roberts.
Okay, my first is a question to Ms. Dolan. Mr. Jewell made assertions that the improvements made by the leasee were violations of the lease agreement, and based upon what Ms. Mato said, is that simply because those improvements could and would presumably last longer than the 4-year lease? Is that the case? Was that a violation of the lease agreement?
So I don't have the actual executed lease agreement in front of me, but it's in code that any improvements have to be able to be removed at the end of the lease term, or they basically revert to the borough. So I don't know that it...
Which is what this lease says.
Yeah, so the provision on the lease term being related to the useful life of the improvements is so that your lease term doesn't go longer. I think it's to protect
us. We would not want to. We would not want to issue a 50-year lease for someone that was going to put a tent on it and claim that it's for our protection.
So really, if the leasee in this case built the Taj Mahal on that building or a replica on that property, it's his problem. If the lease isn't extended.
Further, if we don't see it as a Taj Mahal and we see it as a Tyvek mess, and we have to remove it for him because he hasn't removed it, we bill him for that removal.
All right, I'm going to be proposing two amendments to this resolution. And I'm going to tell you, but I want to break it up because it's too complex. One amendment is going to be, the first one is simply going to be to amend the duration of the lease, of the extension of the lease. At this point, my understanding is we're 3 years into the 4-year lease. So I'm going to be moving to amend the lease term to 12 years instead of 20. And I'm also going to be amending the resolution to ask, secondly, that that provisions be inserted into the lease extension in which the leasee will have to agree or will be will be prohibited from protesting or taking any legal action to prevent or delay the issuance of mining permits on the adjoining property or seeking any kind of compensation for loss of value to his leasehold. So with that, my First Amendment.
Yep.
I move to amend lines 31 and 64 to state 12 years.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence, second by Mr. Taki to change 20 on lines 31 and 34 to 12. There are a few other places where I see a 20, such as line 58.
All right.
I presume that your intent is to change all 20s to 12?
Yeah, if I could.
And I presume that the second is good with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. And do you want to speak to this a little more?
I do. I think he'll be 3 years into his lease. An extension to 12 years means that his lease term will end in 9 years from this May, I guess 2024. And we've heard from several people from the mining industry testifying that this, the true development of this mining property is going to take 8 to 10 years. So that's why I'm making this, proposing this, because I acknowledge that if we've got another Fort Knox next door to this lease, then we don't want to in any way impede the development of that property. And that's why the Second Amendment is going to be added, because of the input from the mining industry that the mere existence of a lease will scare off investors, which I find to be a little somewhat irrational. But yeah, I can understand that. So that's my First Amendment.
Okay. So on the amendment, I have Mr. Lejeski and Mr. Cooper and Mr. Roberts. Mr. Lejeski.
Okay, so this one is just for 12 years. That's the only change in this amendment. Okay. I guess I'd like to see shorter than 12. And we'll have to get to your other amendment, Mr. Lawrence, because that actually interests me quite a bit. I want to, I guess I'll save my comments.
For now.
But for 12, the end game, I'd like to see a shorter lease that, if we legally can, I don't see why we couldn't, automatically renews at the termination of it. That's something that we could do.
You can legally do it. I don't like automatic renewals because they're difficult for us to keep track of. So it's just for administration purpose. I prefer that we execute a new document because otherwise you can be into a renewal period without realizing it. So it's just easier to track an expiration and execute.
Well, at any rate, I'll throw the idea out there. I would prefer a shorter one that automatically renews that has some sort of option.
Are you proposing an amendment to the amendment,
Not
or
at
are
this
you
time.
just?
I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay.
That we have a shorter one that automatically renews and that there is something in there that would allow for the development of a mine in addition to the already existing process.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. I appreciate Mr. Lawrence's intent here, but let me speak against the proposed amendment. I think that, you got a case here where Mr. Haltman has come before us and said he's fully and 100% aware of what's going on. He has essentially assumed the risk of keeping his operation in this area, and I don't think that with those circumstances, especially after Ms. Mota read Mr. Barker's email about this what they were going to do to kind of coexist, and it sounded like he was willing to make some concessions on his part. I mean, I think we have somebody right now who's ready, willing, and able to use borough land to increase our tax base. In a 20-year lease or a 10-year lease or a 12-year lease, I don't think it's going to change the fact that Sven knows what he's getting into going into this. And if they start mining there with an open pit mine, then Sven's got to live with that. That's part of it. I've represented mining clients in the past who've gone ahead with mine prospects with much greater obstacles than having a Aurora and dog sled business right next door. So I appreciate the intent, but I don't think it's necessary. And I think that they have each side of this has adequate legal protections as it is right now. And we should go forward with the lease extension as proposed.
Mr. Roberts.
I make an amendment to change the 12 to 8.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved by Mr. Roberts and seconded by, I believe, Mr. Wojcicki, to change 12 every place it was proposed to be present to 8.
Yes. So if you look at what he's invested in for 4 years, and I have more questions I'll be asking on his investments later, but for 4 years he put in $188,000. He was willing to put that much in for a 4-year term. He thought there was a payback in 4 years for the $188,000. And so if he's putting in $150,000, that's another 4 years to pay that back. And he's already built the business up and got it going, and it's already been building, right? He's not in that initial phase anymore. It's a growing business and it's working. So I think it's plenty of time for him to get payback on investment with the 8. And then in 8 years, we can see the future assembly. We'll see where this is and where the mining plan is, and we'll have a much better picture of what's going on. So I would ask you to support 8 years as the term.
So on the amendment as amended.
Point of order. Well, correction. I want to make sure both these that Mr. Roberts understands that when I said 12 years, it's an extension to 12 years. So it's an additional 9 years is what effectively my amendment would do. This is an extension. This is a resolution to allow an extension of the 4-year lease to 20. I'm saying from 4 years, let's make it 12.
And now that's being proposed to amend
right.
to 8.
And so
9 more years.
On the amendment as amended.
Respond.
Right.
So 8 means he would get 4 years on top of what he's got, and so that's why the math with the numbers.
Your intent is just give him 4 more years, 5 more years.
Well, yeah, this is an early lease renewal he's doing, but there's nothing wrong with that. And so this gives him another 4 years on top of the year he still has. So we'd end up with 5 more years from today, and then that future assembly could make decisions with more information on where the process was.
So, Mr. Tacky.
I'm going to speak against this amendment to the amendment. I was definitely in favor
Mr.
of.
Tacky, apparently
That's okay. You don't have to.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I just want to clarify because this was just called a renewal, and it's not a renewal. It's an amendment of the existing term. So I think that's where maybe Mr. Lawrence's definition of the term was different. So Mr. Roberts just said this is an early renewal. It's really not. It's actually amending that term under the existing lease.
Amending the lease term.
So is it modifying the lease in any way from the original except for the duration?
Yes.
And the space. I mean, I know that the space is. So that's why it's an amendment, but nothing other substantial.
Nothing that's in the resolution. You can ask Ms. Mota if there's something else that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Tacky.
All right.
Let me interrupt you again.
I'm going to speak against this amendment to the amendment, and I was, in favor of or moderately in favor of Mr. Lawrence's choice of a term. I was actually thinking of something a little bit longer, even in my own mind, somewhere in between, because Sven has said he would be good with 10 years on the record when he was here and asked that question, that he'd be comfortable with that. And from my analysis of the way he was asked the question, it sounded like an additional 10 years. And given the fact that mine isn't actually going to be able to establish itself for 10 years or so, I was actually almost thinking along the lines of Mr. Cooper and saying, no, just give him the 20 years. But I wanted to say, if you went with like 10 years with another 10 years as an option, because if the light pollution ends up becoming a concern for him, then he has his own out. So I'm speaking against this amendment, and I would probably stick with Mr. Lawrence's numbers for the time.
And Mr. Lawrence, speaking of which, you're next. Do you have anything left to say? Okay. Mr. Wojcicki?
Sorry, I forgot to bring up the potential conflict of interest before, since I own a small Aurora viewing company. Is that, do you think that's a problem, or?
Your competitor?
It's indirect, but I just I meant to bring it up before I started any discussion.
So, Ms. Dolan looks quite puzzled, so we'll turn to her.
So this is a competitor of yours, or do you deliver a different type of service?
I deliver a mobile chasing service, not a stationary viewing.
Seems different.
Yeah, I guess I I don't know enough about your business, but I guess I viewed these as two different business types and not in competition. So, but I don't think you have a financial interest in this lease unless it takes business away from you.
I don't think I do either. I just wanted to bring it up for sake of transparency.
I'm with you, Ms. Dolan. It seems that it's pretty different.
A general question, if I could.
Sure,
Like,
Mr. Patrick.
with the number of Aurora viewing companies and
Quite a few. We probably have, I'm just going to guess at least 20, but if you, it may be much more. That'd be a better question for Explore Fairbanks, I think.
Mobile state? Yes.
I'm only aware of one or
stationary.
two other mobile ones. Most of them tend to be your cabin-based, et cetera, like this one.
And that's different than how you provide your
Run into a
services.
lot of tax
If you're
drivers.
talking conflict of interest, I could be unfairly biased in support of Sven's because he's an Aurora business and I want to help him out, or I could be unfairly biased against him because he's a competitor and I want to put him out of business.
So-
Which none of those are true. I just want him to do well.
So we're in a
But-
legislative capacity. We're not in a quasi-judicial capacity. So it's not necessarily an appearance standard. It's whether you have an actual financial interest. So you need to have a financial interest in this, which would mean if he is a competitor, if his business would take business away from you in some way, then you would have a conflict. So, but I understood your business to be different. Like I thought you were taking people out to photograph, and I view him as having yurts where he transports people to a stationary place and does dog sled rides. So I don't know enough about your business to maybe say, but
I don't think it's a conflict. That's what I would say, but I could see someone perceiving it as one. So I'm not trying to waste our time here tonight.
you actually have business relationships with them. Okay, sorry.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I think that if there is a point of order down there or input.
I don't know. It's curious because I have a conflict of interest on every licensee that has a marijuana license, and they might not even be, I might never do business.
But
with
they
them.
could sell, but you could sell your product to them, and I think that's usually why it's deemed, right?
Yeah, or if it is a competitor, then it's one that I don't sell my products to or buy from, but they're a competitor. I'd pushed off of the dais effectively, recuse myself to avoid any conflicts.
So, I think that's potentially different because there is a small number and you have a manufacturing facility, and so you can both be purchasing from cultivators and selling to retail. So there's, I think, a much more direct interest in that. I guess I'm frankly on the fence a little bit, only because I don't know enough about the Aurora market business to tell Mr. Lejeski whether or not this is a direct competitor. But I think regardless, I think what the issue is in front of the body is the lease of borough land. And so if the lease of borough land to someone is going to impact your business financially, then you probably have a conflict. But I don't.
It would be a pretty weak link to me personally financially. I think you could intellectually make the argument, but it would be, I believe, quite weak.
So we exclude insubstantial financial interest. So, I mean, I'm inclined to think that from what Mr. Lejeski has disclosed.
Should we just have a vote of the assembly? We can do that, right?
No, the presiding officer rules under your rules.
And then
I'll go with
and
whatever
then
you go with.
and then they can object.
I have no problem going with your opinion.
Being the number of taxi drivers I've run into that tell me they do Aurora viewing, I'm going to rule that there are quite a few in town, and that it is probably not a conflict, because I think this is a recruiting clientele very specifically for a very specific experience that is different than your experience that you're selling. I think together you're all selling Aurora, but they're all selling Alaska. So I'm going to rule you don't have an interest. I appreciate you declaring it. Back on the amendment as amended. Opposed?
Not amended yet.
Not amended yet. Any other discussion? Seeing none, clerk, I think we're ready to vote on the proposed amendment to the amendment, which is changing every 20 to 8. Every 20, the proposed amendment is to the amendment changes every 20-year period in the lease to an 8-year period. Please call the roll.
Ms. Major?
No.
Mr. Lejeski?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
No.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
No.
And Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
2-6.
It fails 2-6. And we are back to the proposed amendment, which is 12 years. On the proposed amendment of 12 years, any more discussion? Yes, Ms. Major.
So I just want to say, I'm glad that we had the discussion because I was a little confused earlier about kind of the timeline. I'm in favor of this amendment and reducing the number of years, partially because I know that there's still another ordinance that's going to be coming before us at some point that will talk about the sale of borough land, which is also what sort of started some of this discussion. And so I think it gives time for the leasee to make investments, for us to continue, for the economy to continue to grow, build business. At the same time, it gives the mine claim holders an opportunity to continue to seek out investment and continue to work through the process that they need to work through. I just would hate to not allow the leasee to continue to grow their business without perhaps a little more surety on the future of the mine and the investment ready for it.
I don't have anyone else down for the amendment. Does anyone else wish to speak to this?
So we're on the amendment?
We are back on the
12-year
amendment.
amendment.
That's correct. Okay. Clerk, I think we're ready to vote on the proposed 12-year amendment, and then we'll try the difficult one.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Ms. Major?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Lejeski?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
7-1.
It's adopted 7-1. Here, I have a legible copy we can share.
I would move to amend line 61 to add the requirement in the lease that the leasee will be prohibited from protesting or taking legal action to prevent or delay the issuance of mine permits to Treasury Creek Partnership or seek any compensation for loss of value of its leasehold interest. Is it? I know. Okay, well, yeah, no, I added that. Yeah, be prohibited, sure. Yeah.
So Mr. Lawrence has proposed amending line 61 to add the requirement that lessee will be prohibited from protesting or taking legal action to prevent or delay the issuance of mining permits to Treasure Creek Partnership or seek any compensation for loss of its leasehold interest, for loss of value of its leasehold interest. Correct?
I'll second.
And it's been seconded by Mr. Tackey. Do you want me to read it again, or do you guys have? Okay, Mr. Cooper.
I have a question for legal, but
I'm sorry. I had a question for Lynn.
There are many questions around.
Ms. Dolan, is such a lease term enforceable?
Do you want me to give you a copy?
No, I have it written down.
Okay.
Thank you, though. Thank you. I appreciate that. So,
I know you're done.
I don't know. And part of, I guess I'm struggling because he may have rights under state law, although it's no longer our surface that's at issue. It's an adjacent. So I don't know if that's just some type of a nuisance claim. So to the extent that his interest in that land is only what we give him, we would have to be who enforces it. I don't know that a third party would be able to come in and say this was for my benefit, so I want to enforce it. So I'm struggling a little bit with how that would work.
I too have questions about whether it be legally enforceable.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And then the question I was asking Ms. Moda was whether or not this would affect the fair rental value that we've agreed to. And I don't know that answer, so I don't know if she does.
I don't.
Okay. It could though. Mr. Lawrence and then Mr. Roberts.
Well, and you're right. This is the entity that I'm trying to benefit from this provision isn't the borough. It's the mining company. But I've got to believe that if that language is in a lease agreement, that any claim for damages or a claim for nuisance by the leasee, I think is going to be significantly undercut by this language. And the intent of this language is to make investors not shy away because of this leasehold or this lease agreement. And it's my intent is to have that language in there so as to make it less likely that it will dissuade investors.
Mr. Roberts.
First, a question to the chair. There was talk going around when he was making the motion, and I don't know if it changed. In the end, did it still specifically address Treasure Creek Partnership?
Yes. It says lessee will be prohibited from protesting or taking legal action to prevent or delay the issuance of mining permits to Treasure Creek Partnership or seek any compensation for loss of value of its leasehold interest.
Right. I guess I would point out that if they're able to succeed, which I hope that we all hope that they will, that would be the golden egg, that it's probably going to end up in another company's name at some point. And I don't know if it's going to help because what this is about, unlike what Mr. Cooper said, even though there may be legal issues, it's not about the legal, I can't remember the word he used, but the legal basis. It's about investor risk, confidence, right? They're looking at this thing and they're evaluating every project on the planet, and they either look at risk intuitively, or they probably more likely have been doing this a long time. They look at it on a cost basis and they assign some number of, how much grief, money is this going to cost us to do this, to deal with this? And we're putting this in to try and help them have a little less risk factor assigned to this lease. There's nothing perfect. You can't write any of these things airtight, but the more we can give them, more confidence we can give them, the less risk they think it has, the more chance we have of being able to pull somebody in for this project. So I support this amendment, though I do think it should be modified to be for the successors, or however you want to word it, to be broader. Thanks.
I just want to address Mr. Roberts' point. If I were doing due diligence on a prospective mining claim and somebody came into me and handed me a lease that had a provision in that I thought was unenforceable, I would tell that person that this provision is probably unenforceable. So I don't know that it would provide that much assurance anyway to somebody who was truly doing their due diligence. And I guess that's the issue I have with it is why include something that may not be enforceable in a lease?
We like pretty words. Ms. Delorge, did you next, or Ms.
Well, I would certainly. I think Mr. Roberts' point is well taken as far as, it's clear that these claims will likely transfer in ownership. So I'm trying to think of what amendment, the best way of stating that. And
Successors, heirs, and signs.
Well, okay, then we'll say I'd move to amend the amendment to add,
see what Mr. Lawrence says, though.
I was just going to say, can you sell your mining claim? You can sell your land, right? So, yeah, I think that would work then, right? Yeah, I think it would.
Okay, then I would move as an amendment to this amendment after the word partnership, I'd add comma, or its successor or assign, or assigns, successors or assigns.
Heirs or assigns, or just, and where was it at?
After the word partnership.
Partnership, okay. So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Wojcicki to add after Treasure Creek Partnership or its successors, heirs, or assigns. Is there, and seconded by Mr. Wojcicki, is there objection to the proposed amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment is amended to include that language. On the proposed amendment, any other discussion?
Yep.
Yes, Mr. Wojcicki.
I'm still wondering if this is going to achieve the intended purpose. So I forget what was your opinion at this point, the borough attorney, or is it something so complex you might need to look into it for a few days before you?
So we would be basically in the position of having to enforce this. So a third party isn't going to come in and enforce this provision, most likely. In fact, I'm not sure they could because they're not in privity of contract with us. So somebody would be coming to the borough and saying, can you go enforce this lease provision to prohibit Sven or whoever from protesting this issuance of a permit? So I don't know. I guess I don't know how to answer the question of whether you're going to achieve your intended result. I think the intended result is to send a message to Sven, and prohibit him from a nuisance claim or some other type of action if a mine does get developed.
The intended result for me, which I think is the same as Mr. Lawrence, is that when they go out and they look for investors and partners to raise capital, they won't see Sven's as an obstacle. That's my intent.
I don't know enough about the industry to know what they.
Or at the very least, having this in there will make it less of an obstacle than not having it.
Okay, I have the mayor, and then I have Mr. Cooper and Mr. Lawrence.
So I have a legal question. I mean, if this was to pass and then Sven violated it, wouldn't it just cancel his contract? I mean, his contract becomes null and void. His lease with us becomes null and void if he violates the lease agreement. That's easily enforced, isn't it? I mean,
so that's not typically how we draft our breach language. Typically, we would give someone notice and an opportunity to correct. It wouldn't just make the agreement null and void. We would actually have to give notice of the breach and actually terminate the lease under the provisions that are in the agreement.
Well, we could include that language as part of this, could we not? I mean, that's kind of the intent.
It would be the grounds to terminate the lease. Yeah. So it would be grounds to terminate the lease. Whether or not he would independently then have a claim for losing his investment or his leasehold interest, I guess, is a separate question to me. But we could certainly put this as a term and terminate his lease if he were to violate it. I guess that's my point on saying it would be up to the borough to enforce this, not Treasure Creek or some successor.
Okay, so I have Mr. Gray.
Okay, so does that solve the problem by having that termination clause? And if not, and that is deemed unenforceable, as Mr. Cooper was alluding to, does that open us up to potential litigation by either the leasee or Treasure Creek?
So as far as the enforceability, I mean, we usually put a severability clause in all of our contracts. I'm assuming there's one in this lease that basically says if a provision's void under law, you just strike that provision. You don't strike the whole agreement. Right. Yeah. So I think I'm struggling more with whether or not, I don't know enough about the industry. I don't know that any of us do to say whether or not this is going to achieve the intended result. I just don't know that that's a legal question to answer. I think that's a different analysis. Yeah.
In fact, I just wanted to double check that. Okay.
Yeah.
On to have you next.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, and I agree with Mr. Cooper, I don't know that Treasure Creek or Treasury Creek Partnership or its successor could enforce this provision in a lease agreement between Sven and this borough. Probably couldn't. But this borough could, and it would have every reason to do so. I mean, the mining industry would be down here communicating the problem, and we'd hear about it, or our successors would hear about it. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's in the best interest of this borough to make sure that those mining claims are developed. And I don't see how that can ever not be the case. And therefore, I think this provision would be enforced by the borough, by a future borough assembly, future borough mayor. I can't imagine why it wouldn't be.
Mr. Cooper.
Like I said, to be clear, I want to make 2 points. One, I don't think we need to make any of these amendments to have future mining claims develop or Mr. Holtman's Aurora Viewing business develop. I think they can both coexist. They've both said that they can do that. And second, I think in addition to the enforcement falling on the borough, I think in addition to that, there's an issue, at least the way the amendment is worded, with requiring somebody to prospectively release claims against third parties. I mean, that's, you're saying you're giving up certain rights with regard to other parties, and we're making you do it. And I think that there could be an issue with that. So I want to make clear that that is another part of my uncomfortableness with the amendment.
So next is Mr. Taki.
So, yeah, could you reread the last portion of it for financial damages or whatever that was?
You mean the partnership bit or Treasure Creek Partnership or its successor, heirs, or assigns, or seek any compensation for loss of value of its leasehold interest? That part?
Yeah, that part. I'm going to amend the amendment and strike the last portion or seek any damages. I think that's the legally financial part that we have a hard time.
So Mr. Taki has moved to delete or seek any compensation for loss of value of its leasehold interest. Is there a second? Okay. It dies for lack of a second. We're back to the much amended amendment. And I have on my list, Mr. Taki, anything else?
Oh, no, that one.
Mr. Roberts, and then Mr. Wojcicki and Mr. Lawrence.
So I was going to ask the attorney, trying to figure out what do we need to do to make this an amendment so that right now it appears that we would have to take him to court or do something. What would we need to do to turn it into the ability to just end the lease? Because that seems like the simplest solution, that if he goes after to protest the mining in some way like that, then we just end the lease.
Yeah, and actually that might be a better solution, is to just require that we can terminate at will. Although I worry slightly about that, because what's the point of the lease term if we can just terminate at will? But we could. But that's the only other thing I mean, that's essentially what I think you're suggesting.
Make the point that this amendment does, this paragraph, but instead of the way it reads now, it makes me think we have to go to court if he does it or something. But I just want it so that if he violates that term, we make it a term, that specific term, not just
that's a basis to
not just our will.
Yeah. No, I think your language. I think that is what we would draft now. But what I'm saying is we would have to serve them with notice that they
right. I'm fine with
breach the agreement. Yeah,
doing our standard breach procedure. I remember when we changed that.
But I can't. I don't know that I can draft something that's going to guarantee you we won't litigate.
Well, you can't do that. I mean, if they don't vacate the lease, then you have to litigate, of course. But I just want to do something so that at this level, the threat is the lease will go away, which will end the problem. And so
we would draft this as a termination provision, I guess is how we would.
And our leases already say that a violation of any of the terms of the lease constitutes reason to terminate.
Yeah, that's our standard termination clause.
So does the language you use, is that considered a term that would therefore be in the lease and be a violation of the lease if we put it in this resolution?
Yes.
Okay.
It would, because you're conditioning the amendment of the lease on this being in the new agreement. So yeah.
So Lejeski, you're next.
Sure. I guess I wanted to respond to Mr. Cooper. I understand, based off of some of the testimony, how you're coming to this conclusion that they can coexist. But from my shoes, we've had, I guess, some of the best local experts that we can have up here, and they've used the term deal killer. And it's a deal killer not because of some sort of legal problem. They're saying because it can scare off capital to start the project in the first place. And so I'm not willing to just tell them they're wrong, because I think they know more than I do on this. And I'm not sure why you think they're wrong. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. I take them very seriously when they say this is a potential deal killer. And so to Mr. Lawrence's amendment and some comments made by Mr. Roberts, I'm still wondering if maybe, and this could turn into an amendment, or amendment to amendment, or whatever, eventually. I'm looking here, I think he spent $350,000 and planned for the next year. I have to get the document back up here. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Whatever the number is, I would really like to make it a part of the contract if he wants to extend this to, is that the right word, extend? In this case, yeah, right, extend, not renewing. That the borough has an option to give him, say, 24 months notice to terminate the lease, and we compensate him $350,000, and you're saying we can't, so we could say if a private party volunteers to pay that, the lease is up. We terminate it, and put another stipulation in the ordinance that says we intend on enforcing that if a mine comes along. I don't know if that's a better way. I think we're kind of on the same page, and we're just trying to find a way to craft it.
Cooper?
Sure, I just wanted to address Mr. Lejeski's point. I mean, one, I think that we're giving greater weight to the mining interest here than we are to Mr. Holtman's interest. And two, in my prior life, when I was a private practice lawyer, I represented several mining clients that ranged across the spectrum in size and complexity and what they were looking for and what they were doing. And as I said earlier, I've seen claims proceed and operations proceed with greater obstacles than an Aurora viewing business next door. And that's why I feel like in this case, especially where Mr. Holtman has said, I'm okay with this, that I don't think that it would necessarily scare off investors to the same degree that we've heard from folks pushing really their own interest in this particular piece of property. So that's where I'm coming from. And I will preface that by saying I have not been involved in representing mining clients for over 6 years, so I don't know the current state of the market, so to speak. But that was my experience for many years before that.
Mr. Lawrence.
Well, I understand where Mr. Cooper is coming from, but I think there is some validity. I'm not saying it wasn't overstated, but I think there's some validity in the testimony from mining industry people that the mere presence of a leasehold interest next door that's obviously going to be inconsistent with gold mining could discourage or could prevent a big investor coming in, and I don't want to take the chance. The fact of the matter is, if this property becomes another Fort Knox, it's almost a game changer for this borough. It's huge, and I don't want to jeopardize that. And that's the reason when I know that Mr. Parker and Sped talked, and the two of them seem to be able to come to some accommodation to some extent. But it's the investors that I worry about, and that's the reason for this language, so that the owners of the mining claims can pick this lease up and show have the investor read this language, and hopefully allay concerns about this situation.
So, Mr. Olin, it looks like but before I have a question for you. What would happen if Mr. Sven or Mr. Halter didn't agree to this language if it were approved? Would you come back to this body and say we weren't able to execute the lease, or would you just not execute it?
I think that would be a policy call of the administration. He could still live out the remainder of his initial 4-year term, and then they would decide, I guess, what they wanted to bring back.
You had something.
So I was going to ask for some clarification on these the provision about seeking compensation for loss of value of the leasehold interest. Is that I took that to mean taking legal action or initiating some type of a formal action, but I was asked kind of how are we going to administer this, and how are we going to decide what that is to determine if it's a basis?
I don't want to prevent the mining company from entering into a private arrangement with the leasee to buy them out. It's my intent that this seeking compensation would be in the legal arena.
Okay, and then my other question is this, so it's he's prohibited during the duration of the lease, right? So if our lease is up, he has potentially, if it's a nuisance or some other type of tort, 2 years. So are we saying, I don't know how we would, I guess just thinking on the enforcement lines, we wouldn't have a means to even terminate a lease if the lease was up and he still may have a claim. So do you know what I'm saying?
No, exactly. I mean,
he might be able to bring an action 2 years after our lease ends if it's nuisance or some other type of a tort that he's bringing against Treasure Creek, and we would have nothing to enforce at that point because the lease is terminated, the lease is over, or just maybe ended by its natural term. So this may be meaningless depending on the timing of things, I guess is what I'm saying. There may be no way for us to.
But
I don't know how to.
I got to believe that if there's a provision in the lease agreement that made it clear that it was the leaseholder, the borough's intent, that mining activities be given a preference or priority. I don't know how is he going to collect damages when his lease?
Because the lease. Oh, that's a good point, right? So he'd already be. Well, depending on when the mining claim started.
Well, and that's why my initial amendment was to knock it down to 12 years.
Yeah, it's just difficult to envision how this will work. I don't know. We're being pioneers maybe with this language. So.
As much as it pains me, since I'm the one holding on this issue, I'm going to move to suspend the rules to complete the agenda for tonight, since we're approaching 11 o'clock, and I don't know that we'll be done by 11:30. I'd rather just take care of that issue now.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Manny. Who would like to have the...
Not today.
Mr. Lejeski.
It's not debatable.
That was one of the seconds.
I know, but I was trying to
Oh,
find
I'm
a second.
sorry. Thank you.
Pardon me?
I was just agreeing that was one of the seconds.
Yeah. So on the motion to suspend the minutes or suspend the rules to complete the agenda, including assembly members' comments and things from the mayors and everything. Oh, we've got comments. Okay. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This takes 6. Mr. Lejeski?
Yes.
Ms. Major?
Can I get clarification
Yes,
on
you may.
what it means? So suspend the rules meaning?
So we're going to keep going until we're done, and the proposal is to allow Mr. to go through borough
At 11:30,
comments from the. Yeah, we have to stop unless we do this, and he wants to go to the bitter end.
Going into like 2 a.m. if we have to.
That's what he says. That's the motion.
Unless we have another motion later.
I can't stay here till 2 a.m. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
Okay.
I said no.
No, thank you. Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Yes? Thank you. Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Did it have to be an excited yes to count? Okay. And anyone want to change their votes? Seeing none.
6-2.
Passes by the skin of its teeth. And we're back to the discussion of Mr. Lawrence's amendment. I don't have anyone on my list. Is there anyone? I'm sorry to the listening public. People are melting down at the dais. But
Can we call the question in this assembly? Is that possible?
yes, so the question has been called.
I'll call the question.
There are 2 hands raised, and I'm sorry.
It's a non-debatable
I
motion.
know. I apologize to them. Pardon? No, I don't think you need a second to call the question.
Fine, defined. It's been a while. And stop debate. This is called it's previous question. It is not debatable, and it takes 6.
But did it need a second?
Yes, it does.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved by Mr. Roberts, seconded by Mr. Cooper to call the question. It needs 6. Clerk, please call the question for us, or at least the roll.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Ms. Major?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Lejeski?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none, we have called the question. So, on the amendment,
To the amendment.
do you want me to read it to you again, or are you guys pretty clear about what it is? Okay, mildly amended. And let me see.
Not voting on the amendment, right?
Pardon me?
We're voting on the amendment?
We're voting on the amendment. Please call the roll.
Mr. Tackey?
No.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Lejeski?
Sorry, we're on the amendment.
On the amendment.
To language. That,
The lessee will be prohibited from language.
yes.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Ms. Major?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
And Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none, the amendment fails. 4-4. We are back to Resolution 2018-18 as amended. Currently, it's at 12 years. Mr. Roberts.
So I'd seen the assessor earlier, and I was hoping he was going to stick around. Hopefully you can answer this question. So I wanted to know about the house because we were told an email that the actual house built, let me get the description here, instead of being a 2-story cabin, was a large 3-story permanent house on a concrete slab and concrete block wall foundation. Can you speak to whether that's true or not, and if it's not, what is there with the house? I don't care about the yurts.
It is a log cabin. There are multiple structures, all of them meant to be relocated. That particular one will be more expensive to relocate than the others.
Okay. Is it 2 stories or 3 stories?
2 stories.
So I noticed that with the last resolution, we had a map showing the structures that were defined that he was going to build, but I didn't see one with this. Are we not getting a site plan with this? How's that working?
At the time of resolution, no. The lease calls for as-built after construction.
Okay, so whereas before with the original resolution, we approved exactly which buildings were going on. With this one, he has carte blanche to build whatever he chooses?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. So the initial resolution came with a development plan that didn't have building construction plans.
Okay. What was the attached map about then?
It's a development plan which we approve before he can go and construct. So he would tell us what he's going to build, but he would only provide as-built after construction.
Right, but he gave us language that we put in the lease, right?
Correct.
And so in this case, I guess I don't remember now. Did he put the specific language in here of what he was going to build?
Overnight cabins, I have not received from him size, dimension, no. But we have been told the dollar amount.
Right. So I know this isn't necessarily your department. I'm just hoping you might have an answer. Are those cabins, not his, but the other smaller ones, guest cabins, are those for overnight stays? Does he pay bed tax on those? Do you have any idea on that?
You're referring to the ones he intends to construct this summer with $150,000, or the ones that are...
The ones existing and the ones constructing?
They're dog handler cabins.
Okay.
Because he's got anywhere from 60 to 80 animals on the property, so they're specifically for the people that handle the dogs.
Okay, great. And then, I just want to speak, I'm going to speak against this lease. I think in my 5.5 years on the Assembly, that's one of the biggest mistakes we made, which, I mean, we didn't have the information when this came in front of us, but the chance of messing up a $1 billion project, it just awes me that we're taking the kind of chance. There's nothing else that comes in front of us that comes that close, right? I mean, that's our entire buildings that we just talked about being worth $1 billion, and we've got a $1 billion project that will generate income, not just in property taxes, which would be humongous, just like Fort Knox is humongous, but all the incredible jobs that come out of that, and it's great. And the fact that we still have a place in the borough that we can have a gold mine like that is incredible. And it's sad that it didn't get protected as it should, and we ended up in this situation, but I can't be the one who votes for a lease that might impinge upon that. Now, I think anything's possible, and maybe they're overstating. I'm no expert. I can't tell whether they're overstating their case of how that could work. But I'm sure that everything comes into play when people are looking at investing millions and billions of dollars, right? It all comes into play. They're going to look at all the samples that come out. They're going to look at that. But when they look at that land, that's a factor. And so you have to outweigh that by having more of a prospect for them to take that level of risk. And so those decisions, we should be doing everything we can to maximize that decision. Think about what we did for the F-35s, all the effort that got put in, the money. We did everything we could to maximize what this borough did to attract the F-35s. Lots of little things, right? This is a little thing. If you look at all that land, this is one little speck of land out there. But we should be doing everything possible to maximize that potential, because if there was some magic wand we could wave and make that happen, that would be more impact than everything else we did on this assembly. It's for the good of the community. That would just be incredible. We may have helped some individuals out individually, and I don't want to minimize that, but this would be incredible for a large-scale project, and we should be focused on doing everything we can to make that possible. And we can only do little things, right? Most of it's out of our hands. It's not like we make all those decisions. But I won't be voting to move this lease forward because I don't want to add anything in the stack against this project going forward. I want to maximize the chance of it. And it was a mistake we made, and we should just recognize that. He was prepared, that he knew up front he'd only get the 4 years. And so he was prepared for that. He's made money on it. He's paid things off. He's done well, and I'm glad, and I hope he does succeed in his business. But this ended up being the wrong spot. We made a mistake. And so we just need to own up to that, and so I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lejeski, and then Mr. Tacky, and then Mr. Lawrence.
So I largely agree with Mr. Roberts. It was a mistake to lease it in this location to begin with, but I'm also recognizing that we've done this. And once I think discussion's done here, this is my plan if the borough attorney thinks it's workable. The technical part is to move to postpone this until, and I'm not making a motion right now, I'm just until the 27th. And then I'd like to have some time if anyone wants to help me craft a substitute that would add in a sort of option to terminate the contract, as I mentioned earlier tonight, something along those lines.
Okay, Mr. Tacky.
I'm just going to speak in favor for the resolution to be able to continue this lease for 12 years. I think that the picture that's painted by Mr. Roberts in the mining industry of being a multi-billion-dollar operation, if the money's there for that, they're going to make that happen. Like, I've worked for Fort Knox. I know they strive and work really hard. I mean, they push back NOAA lands, right? And they're planning to expand their pit. So if the money's there and the exploration's there, then there is no doubt in my mind that a company that has mineral interests in their blood is not going to go for it. They'll work with him or look at possibly working a deal out with that lessee if they think it's going to be that big of a problem. But if the money's there, the project will get done. And so I think that since this lessee has agreed and knows the risks that's associated with being next to a mine, it would be rather disingenuous of us not to allow him to continue his business and continue to expand and grow the tourism industry in our community while they're exploring for minerals.
Mr. Lawrence, you're next.
Well,
First of all, I want to say that I definitely do not think it was a mistake 3 years ago to grant this 4-year lease. And I think the testimony from the mining industry confirms that. Nothing has happened in the last 3-4 years, and it wasn't because of this lease. It's the industry has been down. Prices have been, mineral prices have been generally low, and I'm happy the fact that we've had a gentleman come to this country and this state and build a business that has generated property taxes for the borough and wages for people with jobs, and has provided an attractive business for tourists to come to who are going to be spending money elsewhere at the same time. So I don't think it was a mistake at all to do this. And I think, like I say, I don't think in any way this mining operation has been delayed a second because of this lease. And Mr. Roberts mentioned the F-35s, and there's some analogous, but if the F-35s were put at Eielson, and I'm glad they were, there's nothing potential about it. The economic impact would be substantial. I acknowledge that if we have another Fort Knox on Old Murphy Dome Road, that's going to be substantial. I mean, really substantial. But I don't think it's a done deal. I think it's all it is potential. And at some point, they're going to have to put up or shut up. But I'm still going to vote for the resolution to authorize the administration to go forward, in main part because we've shortened the term enough that I don't think it's going to be an impediment when it comes down to it. I think everything I've heard, we're still 8 to 10 years out, and if the investors know that this lease will go away in 9 years from May, by the time they get ready to start operations, they're going to know it's not going to be a problem. So I'm going to vote in favor of the resolution.
Mr. Gray.
Sure. So I guess I agree with Mr. Lawrence that. Yeah. I don't understand what the mistake was exactly, and I don't understand. I hear earlier that both parties, or at least two of the interested parties, acting in good faith to find compromise on this. And if these are people working in this industry, I understand why all of a sudden there is an issue raised about investors. Well, people working in the industry wasn't that concerned. Shouldn't that concern have been there all along? I don't want to jeopardize the potential development of a mine. No. But I also don't want to turn my back on a successful business owner that has, 4 large sites. Talking about businesses, he has all 5-star ratings. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's been very successful with this. I don't feel like I can turn my back on him as well. So I will be supporting this resolution.
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Tackey summarized my point succinctly. I also concur with Mr. Gray and Mr. Lawrence, the shortened term notwithstanding.
And I just have one question. Has this been before LMAC? Do we put these kind of leases back, renewals back before them?
LMAC was created by ordinance to deal specifically with policy. They advise the Assembly and the administration on policy issues. This is a case-by-case thing. They would not.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none?
Move to postpone.
Okie doke. Ms. Lajewski has moved to postpone. Is there a second?
Well, do I need to say wait?
It automatically goes to our next meeting unless you refer it to a committee.
Okay, the next meeting is the 20th.
April 26th.
April 26th.
Okay,
And that's what you
I
intended,
move to postpone.
So let's see if there's a second. Has anyone second moved? 26th. I don't see a second, so it fails for lack of a second. So, Clerk, I think we're ready to vote on Resolution 2018-18 as amended.
Okay, Mr. Lajewski.
No.
Ms. Major.
Yes.
Mr. Roberts.
No.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Tackey.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Ms. Dodge.
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
Next two.
It's adopted as amended. And that takes us to consideration of calendar new business. And we have an ordinance that I need a request. Ordinance 2018-12 is an ordinance amending Fairbanks North Starborough Code Title 18 regarding agriculture and livestock in various zoning districts, including to add urban livestock and market gardens as allowable uses, and adding and amending definitions and standards. The sponsor is Mayor Castle. We would like to refer it to the Planning Commission with recommendation due back not later than June 6, 2018. But to do that, I need a request from someone. I need someone to move to refer to the Planning Commission with recommendation due back no later than June 6, 2018, because we forgot to put it on the consent agenda.
I'd move to refer ordinance number 2018-12 to the Planning Commission with recommendation due back not later than June 6, 2018.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Gray and seconded by Mr. Lawrence to refer 2018-12 to the Planning Commission with recommendation due back no later than June 6, 2018. Is there any objection to that? Seeing none, it's referred. And that takes us to Ordinance 2018-06, which is consideration of calendar new business. Ordinances to be introduced and advanced to public hearing. Ordinance 2018-06, an ordinance amending Chapter 18.104, Fairbanks North Starborough Code regarding notification of rezoning, conditional uses and variances, and amending procedures for rezoning and conditional use permits. The sponsor is Assemblymember Roberts. It's currently referred to the Committee of the Whole April 19th, 2018, and advanced to April 26th, 2018 for public hearing. Assemblymember Roberts, seconded by Assemblymember Lajewski, removed this item from the consent agenda on April 12th. And I believe, Mr. Roberts, you have a motion?
Yeah, I would like to schedule this to actually go to the June 7th Committee of the Whole and the June 14th regular Assembly meeting.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Roberts and seconded by Mr. Lawrence to refer this to the Committee of the Whole on June 7th and advance to the June 14, 2018 for public hearing. Is there any objection to referring these to the new dates? Seeing none, that's approved. And that takes us to communication to the Assembly. A memorandum from Nancy Ashford Bingham, Borough Clerk, regarding certification of the March 27, 2018 service area mill levy elections. Clerk, I wonder if you have a staff report.
Yep, just a real quick report. On March 27th, we held 2 mill levy service area elections for the Muskox service area and the Murphy service area. Both of those questions to their residents passed, and I'm asking the Assembly to accept the report of the Election Canvass Board and declare that both elections in each service area were validly held.
And I should have said this is on page 64 of your packet. Is there a motion to certify? The proper motion is...
Move that the Assembly accept the report of the Election Canvass Board and declare the Murphy and Muskox service area mill level elections of March 27, 2018 were validly held.
Second.
So moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Gray to accept the report of the Election Canvass Board. Is there any objection?
We'll call on the election.
That's right. Please take the roll.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Ms. Major? Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
8-0.
It's adopted 8-0. Mayor, we have come to the point where we are looking for messages. Have you messages this evening?
Well, I have about an hour and a half of them.
Oh, very good.
But I think maybe I'll just be brief and say I already talked too much tonight, so no other comments. Thank you.
Okay. So that takes us to reports of special and standing committees. I could go down the roll, but I can also just see if anyone wants to raise their hand because they have a report. Seeing none, there are no reports. So that takes us to citizens' comments. And this is citizens' comments on items other than those appearing on the agenda. So this is a section to speak on anything not scheduled on the agenda. I'm going to open public hearing because that's what we do. I don't see anyone coming forward, so I'm going to close public hearing. And that takes us to Assembly member comments. And Mr. Cooper told us that he had comments, so we'll start with you.
I do. My comment is I want and request that folks think about how late they're willing to stay on Saturday for the work session. This is probably a bad question to ask at 11:20 on a Monday night, but I've asked the clerks to kind of send out something to get a sense because we're trying to schedule the rest of the departments. We need to figure out whether we're realistically going to try and finish it this Saturday or if we're going to go to a third Saturday. And in the past, we tried to do it in 2, but there's conflicts on the third when we get into
And make sure we have a quorum.
making sure we have a quorum and making sure that we have a quorum. I'm going to reiterate that. You'll see an email from the clerks, but I wanted to get that out there. Thanks.
You have a question, Mr.
I've
Lawrence.
got a question. Once the Finance Committee makes its quorum, once it
Somebody
commences,
can leave.
can people leave at that point and not lose the quorum?
My understanding is yes. However, it still remains a majority of the members present. And once we establish a quorum, anybody who's present who is not on the Finance Committee can vote. So,
all right.
Okay, so let's keep doing random. And Mr. Lawrence, do you have Assembly member comments?
No, I'm ready to go home.
Okay, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Gray.
No.
Ms. Major. Mr. Lajewski.
Yes. If I don't have a tour on Saturday or Friday night, which I don't think I will, I'm planning on planning on attending the full Finance Committee in terms of hours. I can do whatever. I'll stay as late as necessary. And then I guess to our borough mayor, I do disagree with some of your methods, but I applaud you for your efforts in the unfunded maintenance backlog. I'm losing the words. I'm getting a little tired too here, but anyway, thank you.
Mr. Tackey.
No comment. Thanks.
Thank you. So that takes us to Thursday. We have a special Finance Committee meeting at 5:30, and that'll be a discussion between the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly and Administration and the Fairbanks North Star Borough School Board and Administration. A reconvened special Finance Committee meeting at 5:40, a presentation of Fairbanks North Star Borough School District 2018-19 recommended budget, and the regular Assembly Committee, Finance Committee meeting and Committee of the Whole work session will follow the special Finance Committee meetings. And then, of course, Saturday, as has been mentioned, we have the reconvened Assembly Finance Committee budget work session. It starts at 9 a.m. in the Assembly chambers. And with that, we're adjourned.